Under the loud orders of Spirit Lord Huang Liang, all of the humans present were made aware of the fact that they were joining forces with the demon race to bring down the spirit tribe cultivators. Even though they were slightly surprised by this arrangement, none of them stated any objections. All of a sudden, the demonic chi up above tumbled and surged, following which a large horde of sinister-looking demon beasts, as well as a dozen or so metamorphosis stage demonic cultivators, revealed themselves one after the other. Meanwhile, all of the humans had summoned their treasures and spirit tools, sending vast swaths of light rising up into the sky. Tian Ying and Huang Shi had been struck by a sense of foreboding as soon as the young man from the demon race had begun to communicate with Spirit Lord Huang Liang through voice transmission. After witnessing the events that had unfolded since then, it was quite clear to them that the humans and the demons had formed a temporary alliance. Their expressions darkened in unison as they glanced at one another before immediately staging a retreat. The wooden birds and massive stone giants behind them also retreated rapidly toward the entrance to the valley. The spirit tribe cultivators were retreating without even putting up a fight. This was a rather surprising turn of events for both the humans and the demons present. However, they naturally arrived at the conclusion that the spirit tribe cultivators had to be retreating as they knew that they were no match for their foes. As such, their morale was instantly given a significant boost as they quickly gave chase. In the blink of an eye, the slower wooden and stone puppets that were lagging behind had been destroyed, and some of the humans and demons who had led the way from the front had already entered the valley. They had encountered no resistance whatsoever. The young man from the demon race and Spirit Lord Huang Liang were both rather bewildered by what they were seeing. They had all waged battle against spirit tribe cultivators in the past, and they were well aware of just how resilient the spirit tribe cultivators were. However, these two were simply retreating without offering up any resistance, and that was far too abnormal. The young man's expression darkened as he hurriedly turned to Spirit Lord Huang Liang and said, "Tell them to stop. Something's definitely wrong here." "Something is indeed amiss." Spirit Lord Huang Liang nodded before taking a deep breath, then letting loose a long cry to signal a retreat. However, right at this moment, a vast expanse of crimson light abruptly appeared over the entrance to the valley. Loud thunderclaps then erupted as a crimson lotus that was several tens of feet in size materialized amid the crimson light. The lotus petals were as crimson as blood, and it was rapidly rotating in the air. As soon as the young man from the demon race caught sight of the lotus flower, he exclaimed, "This is bad. It's profound spirit Su Tian." Even though Spirit Lord Huang Liang had never seen this crimson lotus before, he had naturally heard of the 8 profound spirits of the artifact spirit tribe, so he was also quite startled upon hearing this. However, before the two of them could do anything, the crimson lotus suddenly transformed into a massive crimson waterfall, crashing down directly from above. Any human or demon who came into contact with the crimson waterfall was instantly reduced to plumes of smoke. Regardless of whether it was protective demonic chi or defensive treasures, nothing could withstand the power of this waterfall. In the blink of an eye, less than half of the humans and demons remained, all of whom had yet to rush into the valley. All of those who were fortunate enough to have survived wore expressions of shock and horror, and all of them had fled in retreat before Spirit Lord Huang Liang even had to let loose the long cry. After engulfing so many humans and demons, the crimson waterfall seemed to still be dissatisfied. It came sweeping out of the valley and flooding straight toward the fleeing humans and demons. The young man and Spirit Lord Huang Liang naturally couldn't just stand by idly and watch any longer. Both of them were furious as they sprang into action at the same time. The young man opened his mouth, and a gust of violent gray demonic winds erupted from within. The gray winds transformed into a gray windworm, flying directly toward the crimson waterfall. Meanwhile, Spirit Lord Huang Liang harumphed coldly as he rustled his sleeve, producing a golden yin-yang mirror that hovered in front of his chest. He then made a hand seal, and a pillar of golden light as thick as the diameter of a large bowl shot forth through the air. Following bursts of resounding booms, the windworm and the pillars of light struck the crimson waterfall, resulting in a massive explosion that managed to arrest its momentum. "Haha, I didn't think I'd encounter two beings of the same level as I am in such a secluded and rural place. My apologies for not coming out to greet you two sooner." The crimson waterfall flowed backward and materialized into a crimson lotus flower again. A humanoid figure flashed, and a spirit tribe man in a set of long azure robes appeared atop the lotus flower with a sharp look in his eyes. He was none other than Su Tian of the Artifact Spirit Tribe. After he withdrew the Crimson Waterfall, the young man and Spirit Lord Huang Liang glanced at one another before also withdrawing their abilities. Thus, the gray winds and golden pillars of light immediately disappeared. However, both of them were appraising Su Tian with dark expressions. Spirit Lord Huang Liang cast his gaze toward the 100 or so humans who had managed to escape that ordeal, and he discovered that even the two nascent soul cultivators who had accompanied him here were missing. An enraged look appeared on his face upon making this observation as he roared, "Su Tian, how dare you attack those juniors with such reckless abandon as a profound spirit? Aren't you afraid that we'll do the same to the juniors of your spirit tribe? They're just a few beings below the nascent soul stage. Their lives are inconsequential. Is your human race going to declare war on our spirit tribe over such a small matter? Besides, weren't you two about to do the same to our two spirit generals?" Su Tian was not fazed by Spirit Lord Huang Liang's vehement accusations in the slightest. At the same time, spiritual light flashed behind him, and a series of other miniature humanoid figures appeared, among which included the likes of Tai Ren and Hua Guang. The young man from the demon race and Spirit Lord Huang Liang were both surprised by their emergence, and both of them immediately began to calculate the chances of victory for their joint human and demon army. After a short while, both of them were relieved to find that even though they had suffered severe losses at the hands of Su Tian earlier, their combined forces still held a slight upper hand. Spirit Lord Huang chuckled coldly, and he was just about to say something, when the young man beside him noticed that something was amiss. "Wait, the water tribe cultivator from the five elemental spirit tribe is missing. They're trying to stall for time here." Spirit Lord Huang Liang was immediately enlightened upon hearing this, and the veins on his forehead bulged with fury as he waved a hand through the air. Pillars of golden light shot forth once again from the mirror hovering in front of his chest, and the young man from the demon race also unleashed his gray demonic winds in unison. As for the other demons and humans, all of them were being led on a collective assault by the young woman in palatial robes and city lord Lan. They were not fearful of their spirit tribe foes in the slightest. Spiritual light and sword chi streaked through the air as those stone giants and green wooden birds rushed out of the valley once again. The wooden birds flapped their wings and countless green arrows shot forth. Meanwhile, the massive stone giants raised their hands, and balls of light as large as water tanks came crashing down from above. A fierce battle immediately ensued. At this moment, the crimson lotus up head transformed into a river of blood once again as it surged into the sky. Spirit Lord Huang Liang and the young man also rose into the air as they hurriedly unleashed their abilities. In terms of cultivation base, all three were at a comparable level. However, Su Tian was a profound spirit who had existed in the spirit realm for countless years. As such, both his battle experience and abilities were far superior to those of his opponents. In a one-on-one battle, neither Spirit Lord Huang Liang nor the young man from the demon race would be a match for Su Tian. However, both of them were also well aware of this, so they immediately teamed up to combat Su Tian together. In doing so, they managed to gain a slight upper hand over their opponent. All of a sudden, a crimson river intertwined with gray winds and golden light up above, while incessant explosions rang out on the battlefield down below. A blue streak of light flashed through the air as a massive sword of light came crashing down, destroying a dozen or so massive stone giants in one fell swoop. Meanwhile, a massive crimson hand appeared among the spirit tribe forces, descending toward the humans and demons with devastating might. Several human cultivators didn't have enough time to evade and fell into the grasp of the crimson hand, where they were incinerated into ashes. One of the humans in the battle flew into a thunderous rage upon seeing this. He made a hand seal, and his body swelled drastically, transforming him into a giant that was over 100 feet tall. He brandished a pair of glistening black iron fists before swinging them viciously through the air. This was none other than the brawny man with the Jin surname, and as a top-grade body refinement warrior, he had unleashed a secret technique to drastically increase his own size and strength. Several gusts of black wind erupted from his fist like giant black pythons, howling through the air with immense power. All of the wooden birds and stone giants were forced to take evasive measures in the face of his brutal attacks. However, at the same time, a loud roar erupted from among the ranks of the spirit tribe, and a silver humanoid figure suddenly began to expand at an alarming rate. Soon, a silver humanoid figure that was even bigger than the black giant had appeared among the spirit tribe army. This was none other than Tai Ren from the Metal Spirit tribe. The ground tremored violently as the silver humanoid figure rushed over to the black giant, before swinging his gargantuan silver fists wildly through the air. The black giant was unwilling to back down, and he retaliated with his own fists. A series of earth-shattering booms immediately erupted as a result of their exchanges of blows. All of the humans and demons nearby felt as if they were being deafened by the commotion, and all of them hurriedly sped away from the battlefield between the two giants. All of the other spirit tribe cultivators and demonic cultivators were also beginning to reveal their abilities. A black flaming phoenix suddenly shot forth from within the demon beasts, sending black flames sweeping through the air that incinerated over 100 wooden birds into ashes. The black phoenix then swayed as it abruptly disappeared. However, in the next instant, it re-emerged at the entrance to the chaotic valley before revealing itself to be the young woman in palatial robes amid a loud phoenix cry. As soon as she reappeared, she immediately flew into the valley as a streak of black light without any hesitation. City Lord Lan was struck by an overwhelming sense of urgency upon seeing this. He took a deep breath, and the 7 shimmering blue flying swords around him suddenly unleashed over 100 streaks of sword chi toward the stone giants that were attempting to keep him at bay. Thus, he managed to carve out a path for himself, and he also flew into the chaotic valley as a streak of blue light. The 7 or 8 humans and demons nearby also took advantage of this opportunity to fly into the valley after them. The last of them to enter the valley was a young man whose entire body was enshrouded by red light. It was none other than Han Li. Even though he possessed no magic power in his current state, he was somehow able to summon powerful fire spiritual chi that allowed him to fly into the valley at an alarming speed. As soon as Han Li entered the valley, he immediately discovered why this place was known as the Chaotic Valley. The sky up above, the ground down below, and all of the mountains were of a murky gray color, as if a permanent gray veil had enshrouded the entire valley. Han Li abruptly came to a halt. He looked on at the humans and demons flying deeper into the valley, and he narrowed his eyes as he abruptly made a hand seal. Immediately thereafter, he opened his mouth to blast forth a ball of silver flames. A crisp cry erupted from within the fireball before it transformed into a fire raven that was roughly a foot in size, circling around Han Li's body in an agile manner. A peculiar look appeared on Han Li's face as he looked at the silver fire raven, and he murmured to himself, "Should I call you Xian or should I call you the Gradian True Flame? You've already absorbed the Purisun Flame essence, and now you've devoured the soul of that spirit tribe cultivator named Xiao. So be it, I'll call you the Heavenly Spirit Devouring Flame. I'm lucky I converted all of my purple apex flames into Gradian True Flames while I was still in the human world. Otherwise, I would have been in a lot of trouble there." It turned out that after Xian had infiltrated Han Li's body, he was unable to devour Han Li's spiritual sense. Instead, as soon as he entered Han Li's body, the massive influx of fire spiritual power immediately awakened the Gradian True Flame, which had temporarily gone dormant within Han Li's body due to the lack of magic power. The flame possessed the ability to devour all things, so it immediately engaged Xian in battle within Han Li's body, without even necessitating an instruction from Han Li himself. If it was just this fire raven alone, then it naturally wouldn't be a match for Xian, who was comparable in power to a deity transformation cultivator. Unfortunately for Xian, Han Li was also a deity transformation cultivator. On top of that, he had cultivated the Great Development Technique, which made his spiritual sense even more powerful than the average mid-deity transformation cultivator. As such, Xian naturally stood no chance after entering Han Li's body. Just as Xian was engaged in a fierce battle with the Gradian Fire Raven, Han Li unleashed his spiritual sense to forcibly bind Xian's spiritual sense, thereby allowing the Gradian Fire Raven to devour him alive. Even the crimson bead treasure that was his true body had been absorbed into the Gradian Fire Raven. This was engulfment in every sense of the word. Not only had his soul been absorbed, even his memories had been completely taken by the fire raven, thereby allowing it to become the heavenly spirit devouring flame that it currently was. As such, Han Li was able to use the fire raven to imitate Xian's aura and voice to perfection after the spirit general's soul was devoured. Of course, through absorbing Xian's memories, Han Li also learned about the spirit tribe's objective for coming to the setting sun tomb, as well as the existence of that spirit tribe traitor and the drop of divine blood. He was ecstatic upon making this discovery. He couldn't care less about that spirit tribe traitor, but the so-called spirit tribe divine blood was something that he was very interested in. This blood was a type of mysterious liquid that would be produced by the soul of a Holy Spirit-level spirit tribe cultivator following death by natural causes. If the blood were to be dripped onto any sentient object, the latter would develop intelligence and evolve to become a low-grade spirit. Of course, the spirit tribe wasn't entirely created by such a method. Most of them evolved on their own to become low-level spirits. However, this divine blood was still an extremely important tool for the spirit tribe in their quest to maintain their population. As such, it was something that they guarded as secret treasures. However, on this occasion, an artifact spirit tribe being somehow managed to steal a vial of divine blood right under the noses of the guards before immediately contacting the human race, seemingly to offer an exchange. If that was the extent of the story, then Han Li would be rather surprised, but he wouldn't pay much heed to it. What was tempting to him was that aside from its miraculous ability to create low-grade spirits, it also possessed many beneficial effects for human cultivators and body refinement warriors. Cultivators could use this divine blood as an ingredient to create a type of spirit medicine known as the blood yang pill. Consumption of this pill could enhance one's cultivation base to the same extent as what could be achieved by a nascent soul cultivator through over 100 years of arduous cultivation. For body refinement warriors, smearing this blood all over one's body could allow one to attain a secret technique known as blood crystal armor. It was said that this secret technique could enhance one's body even to an even greater extent than complete mastery of the Vajra arts could, allowing a body refinement warrior to take no damage from any attacks below the spatial tempering stage for a period of time. However, this armor was a disposable tool that would disappear once its energy was completely exhausted. Furthermore, if this divine blood were to be consumed by a high-grade body refinement warrior, it would be able to stimulate their spiritual sense, giving them a very high chance of immediately breaking through a cultivation bottleneck. Of course, directly consuming divine blood was a rather risky endeavor. The lower the level of a body refinement warrior and the weaker their spiritual sense was, the greater the chance of death due to backlash from the power within the divine blood. If a body refinement warrior intended to consume this blood in order to facilitate a breakthrough, they would normally find pills like the Heavenly Heart pill to bolster their spiritual sense before daring to ingest the blood. Even so, it was still quite a dangerous affair. However, Han Li was ecstatic after discovering this information from Shi Yan's memories. He possessed deity transformation stage spiritual sense, yet he was cultivating as a body refinement warrior, so the divine blood was perfect for him. Han Li was confident that he would be able to eventually master the last layer of the Vajra arts on his own, but he had no idea how long it was going to take. Furthermore, he didn't know when his minor heavenly tribulation was going to strike, so it was naturally best for him to recover his magic power as quickly as possible. The other reason why he decided to venture into the chaotic valley was because he had temporarily recovered his ability to use magic power. Even though it was only around 60% to 70% of the magic power he had in the past, the density of the magic power he had at the height of his powers meant that this was still comparable to the magic power of the average deity transformation cultivator. After the Gradian Fire Raven had devoured Shi Yan, his pure fire attribute spiritual power had temporarily been stored within the Fire Raven's body. Han Li was currently spreading this spiritual power within his body and using it as his own. It was just that this spiritual power had been attained through cultivation and was an inexhaustible resource that would run out eventually. Due to the fact that it was all fire attribute spiritual power, he was unable to utilize it as well as he would like. However, his abilities and treasures still placed him above cultivators of the same cultivation base. Furthermore, even if he didn't use this fire attribute spiritual power now, it would slowly seep away and disappear over time anyway. By his estimations, he would likely revert back to being a mortal within a month. And Li didn't want to squander this opportunity. As such, he decided to take a risk, posing as Shi Yan and following the instructions assigned to him to mingle himself with the humans in the chaotic valley. Now he had finally made it into the chaotic valley, and it was time for him to enact his plan. Moments later, Han Li pointed a finger toward the spirit-devouring fire raven, upon which the latter spread its wings and disappeared into a nearby rock face. Meanwhile, Han Li flipped a hand over, and a faint yellow talisman immediately appeared between his fingers. He slapped the talisman onto himself, and brilliant yellow light erupted from his entire body. He made a hand seal, and his body swayed as he prepared to unleash his earth movement technique to burrow into the ground. However, things didn't progress as Han Li had planned. After sinking around a foot or so into the ground, he was unable to burrow down any further. It was as if there was an invisible resistant force that prevented him from being able to descend any further. Han Li's heart jolted upon encountering this obstacle. It appeared that there were some peculiar features in this chaotic valley that he had to be wary of. With that in mind, he hesitated momentarily before pulling out a purple talisman from his storage bracelet. There were a few silver runes shimmering on the talisman, and they were inscribed in none other than the beveled silver text that was rarely seen even in the spirit realm. After assessing the copy of the Endless Sky Beast's insights and observations derived from the half-page of the Golden Jade tome, then drawing upon his own observations, Han Li had finally managed to create this semi-immortal talisman in the human world after countless failures. Even though this was only the simplest among the few talisman refinement methods recorded on the half-page of the tome, the materials required were still very difficult to gather in the human world. Only after many attempts was Han Li able to find some substitute materials, thereby allowing him to refine this semi-completed talisman. This was a concealment talisman known as the High Zenith Invisibility Talisman, and due to the fact that it was a disposable talisman, Han Li had never tried to use it before. Now, Han Li was planning to steal the divine blood, and at his current drastically impaired cultivation base, there was no way that he would be able to hide himself effectively using his other concealment techniques. As such, he naturally immediately thought of this talisman. After pulling out the talisman, Han Li released it from his fingertips and allowed it to flutter in the air before him without any hesitation. The purple talisman abruptly exploded, and several beveled silver text runes surfaced before dancing around Han Li. The runes then disintegrated into clouds of silver mist that inundated Han Li in the blink of an eye. The silver mist dissipated moments later, and Han Li had completely disappeared. Right at this moment, several more streaks of light flew into the valley, heading directly toward Han Li. However, none of them were able to detect Han Li's presence, flying past him in a flash as if he actually didn't exist. Han Li was ecstatic to see this. He hadn't moved a single step from his original spot, and nor had he taken any extra measures to conceal himself. However, this group of humans and demons were completely oblivious to his presence, and there was even a deity transformation cultivator among them. However, his current situation was rather peculiar. His entire body seemed to have transformed into some kind of transparent mist-like substance. It was as if his body had become completely formless and could be blown away by a gentle breeze. He then conducted some experiments to find that he was unable to use any secret techniques or treasures that consumed a lot of spiritual power. That was rather disappointing to him, but it didn't matter. He was content as long as he could conceal himself from fellow deity transformation cultivators. After all, due to material constraints, this wasn't even the fully refined version of the High Zenith Invisibility Talismans, so he was already overjoyed by its miraculous abilities. After completely mastering the content on that half-page and truly refining this talisman, such drawbacks could be avoided. At the thought of the other types of immortal talisman refinement methods recorded on that half-page, Han Li was struck by a sense of eagerness and excitement. However, all that would have to wait until he recovered his magic power and transcended his first minor heavenly tribulation in the spirit realm. Hence, Han Li quickly focused his attention back on the task at hand and hovered into the chaotic valley, which was only under 100 kilometers in size. The scorching light pond was the center of the entire valley, and its surroundings were completely enshrouded under gray mist. Han Li was aware of the pond's approximate location, but he didn't dare to use his spiritual sense to survey his surroundings in fear of blowing his cover. After finally arriving at the pond, they discovered that there were already a dozen or so human and demon high-grade beings present, facing off against one another on either side of the pond. The humans were naturally led by City Lord Lan and Tu Chuo, both of whom wore dark expressions on their faces, while the demons were led by the young woman from the Black Phoenix race, as well as three completely identical thin young men who appeared to be triplets. Upon seeing this, Han Li cast his gaze toward the surface of the pond. Aside from the fact that the water in the pond was remarkably clear, it was completely mundane and nondescript otherwise. Just as Han Li was feeling rather surprised and perplexed about this, City Lord Lan appraised the three identical young men, and he suddenly asked, I heard that there's a mutated wolf demon in the Silver Moon wolf race that was able to cultivate its three heads into three different avatars with the assistance of an immensely powerful being. Each and every one of those avatars possesses a cultivation base at the pinnacle of the nascent soul stage, and when all three join forces, they're capable of taking on a deity transformation being. Could you three be those very same avatars? The three young men chuckled in unison upon hearing this. One of them immediately said, I didn't think us three brothers would be so widely renowned. That's ready we are that Cerberus Moon Wolf. We've also heard much about you, City Lord Lan. Care for a spar? HMPH, I have no time for such activities. Fellow Taoist Zio, what are you planning by entering the valley alone? City Lord Lan disregarded the challenge being directed at him, turning toward the young woman instead with an interrogative gaze. What am I planning? Didn't Senior Huan say that there are spirit tribe cultivators trying to capture this called spirit tribe trader in the pond? I came to stop them, of course, the young woman replied with a dainty smile. City Lord Lan looked at the young woman for a while, then glanced at the pond before asking, Is that so? I'm glad you have such intentions, fellow Taoist Zio. Please continue. I will guard the pond in the meantime to prevent any spirit tribe beings from entering the pond. How about that? The young woman faltered slightly upon hearing this before chuckling at the sight of Tu Chu and the several other nascent soul cultivators besides City Lord Lan. If you hadn't come here, then perhaps I would indeed be venturing into the pond. However, seeing as you're here, I'll leave this opportunity to you, Brother Lan. You're not going to make a frail woman like me enter the pond in your stead, are you? I heard that you have a water-warding jade rhinoceros horn treasure. That thing will surely be very useful for when you enter the pond. I can enter the pond, but you have to take your forces and exit the chaotic valley first. City Lord Lan's expression suddenly darkened as his voice became cold and uncompromising. Seeing as City Lord Lan had cast aside all semblance of pleasantries, the young woman's expression also changed slightly, and she gave a cold harumph before falling silent. Neither side was willing to back down at this critical juncture. Meanwhile, City Lord Lan's lips were twitching as he discussed something with Tu Chu through voice transmission. As he did so, a hint of malicious intent surfaced in his eyes. Aside from the young woman and the three identical young men, there were only three other metamorphosis-stage demonic cultivators present. In contrast, aside from City Lord Lan and Tu Chu, there were still 7 or 8 other nascent soul cultivators among the human forces, so they held a clear upper hand. No one else had managed to arrive at this pond after all this time, clearly indicating that they were being held off by the spirit tribe beings. As such, neither side was going to receive additional reinforcements in a short time period. If one side could take the divine blood first, there was no way they'd actually be willing to split the divine blood evenly between both sides. Everyone knew that the prior agreement they had made was only for show, and it was merely an empty promise made so that a temporary alliance could be facilitated. The young woman could sense the aggressive intentions from the humans, and her brows furrowed slightly as she unleashed a secret technique to caution her own troops. At the same time, she rustled a sleeve and an object fell into her hand. The atmosphere became extremely tense, and a physical altercation appeared to be imminent. All of a sudden, the ground near the pond suddenly tremored violently, and the peaceful water within the pond abruptly began to tumble and surge. Immediately thereafter, strands of white light shot forth from within, some of which rose directly into the sky while others descended toward the nearby demons and humans. Upon being struck by these strands of light, countless needle-sized holes were instantly punctured into the nearby rocks. The beings from the two races were greatly startled upon seeing this, and all of them hurriedly unleashed their abilities or treasures to defend themselves. Right at this moment, a layer of blinding light suddenly appeared within the transparent water of the pond, as if an incandescent sun was rising up from down below. Just as the water in the pond was churning and bubbling, a scorching burst of heat suddenly erupted from the white light within. What's going on? Are the spirit tribe beings down there doing this? Han Li was hiding in the air up above, and had also been forced to take evasive measures in the face of the strands of light. Looking at the bizarre phenomenon taking place in the pond now, he was given a massive surprise. He wasn't the only one. The young woman, City Lord Lan, and everyone was also quite bewildered and perplexed. Letter 1D5F3, letter 1D5FF, letter 1D4, 1E, letter 1D556, letter 1D604, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D68C, letter 1D560, letter 1D55E. Something's not right. Isn't the scorching light only able to hide within the pond? How is it able to leave the water? Could it be? City Lord Lan was clearly rather familiar with this pond, yet before he could finish his analysis, a dozen or so pillars of white light that were as thick as water tanks rose into the air. As soon as they left the surface of the pond, they immediately changed directions, hurtling directly toward the humans and demons nearby at an astonishing speed. This unprecedented surprise attack had caught the beings from the two races completely off guard. The powerful beings like the young woman and City Lord Lan were immediately able to unleash a secret technique to flee the scene, while the three identical young men managed to also unleash some kind of secret technique that made them disappear without a trace right before the pillars of light struck them. No one had any time to activate any protective techniques or defensive treasures. Everyone was beset with shock and rage upon seeing this. Before they had even had a chance to figure out what was happening, 5 pillars of yellow light suddenly erupted from the soil around the pond, and there was a series of indiscernible patterns carved onto the surfaces of these pillars. The humans present had the largest number of nascent soul cultivators among them, but they also suffered the most casualties. Most of these people were City Lord Lan's trust subordinates and disciples, and he was naturally furious that they had perished in a place like this. At the sight of the yellow pillars of light erupting from the soil down below, he immediately roared, "Who dares to attack us?" Immediately thereafter, he laid a hand over the top of his own head, and 5 small blue swords immediately shot forth before transforming into massive swords that were several tens of feet in size. Slash, City Lord Lan commanded in a cold voice. The 5 massive swords immediately flashed through the air, flying toward the 5 yellow pillars before rapidly flying in several circles around the bases of these pillars. A string of resounding booms erupted, but the pillars remained intact, with only a series of sword indentations left on their surfaces. City Lord Lan's pupils contracted as he hurriedly made a hand seal to summon the 5 giant swords back to him. Right at this moment, a green viscous liquid suddenly seeped out from the sword indentations on the pillars, emitting an extremely peculiar rank odor. Meanwhile, City Lord Lan kept his sword circling above his head, preparing himself for any further attacks. He was naturally well aware of just how powerful his flying swords were. They were normally capable of easily slicing through small mountains, let alone a few pillars. However, these pillars didn't appear to be normal pillars. Their surfaces seemed to possess a hint of suppleness, as if they were living creatures. The young woman also wore a bewildered expression at the sight of City Lord Lan's failed attack. A burst of low buzzing rang out from the pond down below, as if something had just been awakened. Following the emergence of this strange sound, the 5 yellow pillars suddenly became completely stationary. However, a massive ball of light with a diameter of around 100 feet suddenly shot forth from within the pond. The ball was entirely white in color, but there was a shimmering golden spherical object at its center that was roughly the same size as a human head. "That's the setting sun crystal," Tu Chuo suddenly exclaimed upon seeing this object. As soon as he blurted out those words, he deeply regretted not keeping a tighter lid on his own mouth, and he immediately hurtled forth as a streak of white light to claim the treasure for himself. Upon hearing the words "setting sun crystal," the young woman and the 3 identical young men were also ecstatic. The young woman let loose a loud cry before transforming into a black flaming phoenix as she flew toward the object. Meanwhile, the 3 young men gathered together to form a thick pillar of silver light that shot forth in hot pursuit. However, for some reason, City Lord Lan remained on the spot, refraining from taking any action. Henley also continued to look on, without doing anything as he hovered up above. His target was very simple. He was here for the divine blood. No matter what other valuable treasures existed here, unless they were more valuable than the divine blood, he wasn't going to pursue it and blow his own cover. The young woman and the 3 young men had clearly sprung into action, a split second slower than Tu Chuo. The white light that Tu Chuo had transformed into reached the setting sun crystal first, and he attempted to sweep it away. However, right at this moment, a startling change suddenly struck. An enormous burst of invisible suction force suddenly appeared around the ball of light, causing Tu Chuo's body to falter slightly in midair. He was naturally shocked by this turn of events and hurriedly unleashed his magic power to resist this force. However, several peculiar silver runes then suddenly appeared over his robes, following which Tu Chuo was sucked into the pond, disappearing without a trace. The ball of light remained floating silently in midair, as if nothing had ever happened. The young woman and the three identical young men were naturally greatly startled upon seeing this, and they hurriedly retreated before casting their bewildered eyes toward the pond down below. Meanwhile, City Lord Land seemed to have gleaned something from the situation, and his expression suddenly became very strained. Right at this moment, another thunderous boom erupted from within the pond, following which 5 more yellow pillars of light identical to the first 5 shot forth from the soil. A roar that resembled violent thunderclaps then rang out from within the pond, gradually becoming louder and louder. The pond and the 10 yellow pillars began to tremor violently amid the sound of this thunderous roar. All of a sudden, City Lord Land turned around and flew toward the entrance to the valley as a streak of blue light, disappearing into the mist in just a few flashes. This came as quite a surprise to everyone else. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly as he began to drift higher up into the air. In contrast, the young woman and the 3 identical young men glanced at one another, and even though solemn expressions had appeared on their faces, none of them departed from this place. Shortly thereafter, the water within the pond began to swirl rapidly, transforming into a giant vortex in the blink of an eye. At the same time, the 10 yellow pillars suddenly grew over 100 feet taller. The ground also began to crumble as 2 gargantuan creatures emerged from either side of the pond. Han Li was in the process of ascending to higher altitudes when he took a glance at what was taking place down below, and he was immediately flabbergasted by the sight that greeted him. He discovered that the colossal pillars that had appeared on either side of the pond were merely fingers on the hands of the 2 gargantuan creatures that had just appeared. Now, a pair of those enormous hands were slowly extending upward from within the soil. The water in the scorching light pond had somehow disappeared, and at the center of the pond, a giant eyeball around 20 feet in size appeared. The eyeball slowly rolled around before emitting a sinister light. Han Li shuddered upon seeing this, and his face immediately paled as he recalled a vastly renowned race within the spirit realm. He immediately sped up, flying up into the air without any hesitation. However, he was unable to fly all that quickly anyway due to the limitations of his incomplete high zenith invisibility talisman. The young woman and the 3 identical young men hadn't noticed all of this yet, but they were also struck by a sense of indescribable peril. The young woman harumphed coldly before opening her mouth to expel a crimson handkerchief. She then raised a hand, and an azure worm of light that was around 10 feet in size appeared before circling around her body. It was an extremely profound azure flying saber. The handkerchief rose up above her head, then transformed into a red barrier of light that shielded her body within. Meanwhile, the 3 young men made hand seals in unison as faint silver light emanated from their bodies. The 3 balls of light then combined as one to create a large ball of silver light that inundated all 3 of them at once. After adopting these defensive measures, the 4 demonic cultivators were immediately greeted by the sight of the ground down below in a radius of close to 10,000 feet splitting open at once amid an earth-shattering boom. The massive eyeball at the bottom of the pond blinked, following which the setting sun crystal in midair descended rapidly before disappearing into the eye. A mountainous creature then slowly sat up from the ground. From his vantage point, Han Li was able to see everything. The gargantuan creature was several thousand feet tall, and most of its body was covered in grayish-yellow soil as it raised both arms into the air. It was an unfathomably massive living being. If it weren't for the fact that Han Li had seen demon spirits like the Rahu and the heaven-roaming Kun Peng in the human world, he would struggle to believe that something so massive could exist in this world. The giant was only wearing a loincloth made from some type of unknown beast hide, and it had a single gargantuan eye on its head. The eye was slightly caved in on the giant's face, and it was none other than the depression created by the eye that had given rise to the pond. Aside from that, the giant had a hideous nose and a long mouth that extended almost from ear to ear. As it opened its mouth, sharp white teeth could be seen within. The giant hadn't completely stood up. It had only sat up while the lower half of its body was still buried deep in the ground. It was looking at the 4 demonic cultivators in the air, with no hint of expression whatsoever in its single eye. Impossible, this is a primordial giant. Run. This is not something we can handle, the young woman immediately exclaimed after finally realizing what they were dealing with here. She finally understood why City Lord Lan had fled without any regard for Tu Chu's life. He must have identified the signs in advance and fled for his life. The young woman immediately made a hand seal without any hesitation. The red light barrier around her body rapidly rotated before shattering into shards of red light, while the young woman herself abruptly disappeared. However, her lithe and graceful figure resurfaced in the air 500 to 600 feet away amid a flash of red light. The three young men were also stunned by the sight of the giant, and only after witnessing the young woman escape did they return to their senses, preparing to unleash a movement technique that would take them away from this terrifying creature. However, right at this moment, the Cyclops giant suddenly opened its mouth, and a strange sound rang out from within its throat as a burst of enormous suction force erupted from within. The three young men could feel themselves being sucked toward the giant's mouth, and they hurriedly made hand seals as they tried to resist with all their might. Unfortunately for them, this was a fearsome being that even deity transformation cultivators like the young woman and city lord Lan had to flee from, so three nascent soul cultivators were certainly not going to be able to resist its power. Thus, the three demonic cultivators were forcibly drawn toward the giant's cavernous mouth, and only then were they truly struck by shock and horror. One of the young men immediately transformed into a massive silver wolf that was several tens of feet in length. The wolf let loose a desperate howl, and the other two young men immediately flew into its body as streaks of silver light. Azure and red light immediately began to shimmer on either side of the wolf's head as a couple of smaller azure and red wolf heads emerged. The three wolf heads let loose a long howl in unison, following which silver, red, and azure light erupted from their respective mouths, instantly infusing themselves into the silver protective light barrier around them. Even though their momentum hadn't been completely arrested as a result, they managed to slow themselves down significantly. In the face of such a dire situation, the three demonic cultivators had finally combined once again to revert back to their Cerberus wolf form. Han Li's heart stirred slightly as he witnessed this from up above, and the image of a graceful figure suddenly appeared in his mind. However, he heaved a faint sigh to expel this image before focusing his attention on the events unfolding down below again. Seeing as the pond was a product of the giant's eye, then it was very likely to be the case that the spirit tribe traitor had already been devoured by the giant. Furthermore, according to what he knew about primordial giants, all of them possessed extremely low levels of intelligence and took pleasure in devouring any being from other races, so there was no way that it would be able to identify divine blood. As such, the vial containing the divine blood was most likely contained within the giant's body. That was very troublesome. Even though primordial giants were severely lacking in intelligence, once they grew to maturity, they'd attain abilities comparable to that of early spatial tempering beings. Furthermore, with their brilliant aptitudes, they could even stand up against a body integration stage being. It was said that there was a legendary breed of thousand-eyed giants that could even hold their own against true heavenly spirits like dragons and phoenixes. Han Li was feeling rather hesitant, but he was also quite reluctant to give up on this opportunity. At this moment, the three heads of the Cerberus wolf blasted out several treasures to try and break free from the suction force. However, as soon as those treasures emerged, they were swept into the giant's cavernous mouth by a series of silver runes, rendering them completely useless. Thus, the Cerberus wolf could hold on arduously by expending its own magic power, but its body was still slowly traveling toward the giant's mouth. Even though the giant wolf was blasting out three-colored light with all its might, it was still unable to escape this suction force. Even so, the giant was still getting rather impatient. It suddenly raised a colossal palm before swatting at the Cerberus wolf as if it were taking a swing at a fly. A massive black shadow fell from the sky, enshrouding the body of the demonic wolf. Before it had even reached the wolf, the winds being swept up by the gargantuan palm were causing the barriers of light around the wolf demon's body to quiver and waver, threatening to destroy the barriers at any moment. If the fearsome palm were to actually strike the wolf, the latter would definitely be crushed into mincemeat. Unfortunately for the demonic wolf, it had been completely immobilized by the enormous suction force acting upon its body. Despair appeared in the eyes of all three wolf heads. Just as the gargantuan hand was about to grab onto the Cerberus wolf, an abrupt turn of events suddenly struck. Yellow light flashed near the massive wolf, and a thin and frail figure appeared from thin air before immediately throwing his fists through the air. It was none other than Xianxia, the young man from the demon race. One of his fists was aimed at the oncoming massive palm, while the other had been thrown directly at the Cerberus wolf. Piercing spiritual light erupted from his fists, following which two balls of yellow light shot forth. couple of resounding booms erupted as one of the balls of light clashed the gargantuan palm, but was only able to slow it down minutely before the ball of light was destroyed. Meanwhile, the other balls of light struck the barriers around the demonic wolf's body, forcibly launching it through the air like an arrow, thereby allowing it to escape from the insane suction force emitting from the giant's mouth. At this moment, the giant's hand came crashing down with devastating force, but Xianxia's body merely swayed before disappearing from the spot. In the next instant, he reappeared several hundred feet away right in front of the Cerberus wolf, before gently pointing a finger toward the demonic wolf. Specks of azure light appeared out of thin air, forming a massive azure mirror with a smooth and translucent surface in the blink of an eye. The demonic wolf's massive body crashed into the mirror, sending ripples surging through its surface, before the former was slowly rebounded away. The demonic wolf shook its three heads to shrug off its dizziness before hurriedly extending words of gratitude to its savior. "Thank you for saving my life, Senior Huan. If you're all right now, then hurry up and get out of here. This is not something that you can handle. I didn't think that there would be a primordial giant here. Looks like it must have been lying dormant in this valley before the 3 human regions were founded. Otherwise, there's no way that it would have been able to sneak into this place." A ball of white light then flashed in the air nearby, and a white-robed man appeared with his hands clasped behind his back. The man was none other than Spirit Lord Huang Liang, and he looked on with narrowed eyes at the colossal creature up ahead with a solemn expression on his face. HMPH, that must indeed have been the case. Otherwise, unless the guards stationed at the entrances to the 3 regions were blind, there's no way that they would have missed such a gargantuan creature. Thankfully, it's only a Cyclops giant, and it must have been severely wounded for it to be lying dormant in this valley. If we join forces, we should be able to kill it, Xianxia analyzed. How do we split the spoils? I heard that this giant has a massive chunk of setting sun crystal on its body. That's a superb material for refining yang attribute spirit treasures, Spirit Lord Huang Liang mused with furrowed brows. Xianxia seemed to have already considered this in advance, and he immediately replied without any hesitation. "I'm not interested in what the spirit tribe trader has, so I'll take the setting sun crystal." "All right, you have yourself a deal. All of you look out as well. Even though those spirit tribe cultivators have been forced back for now, we have to be wary of them making a return." Spirit Lord Huang Liang accepted this arrangement before suddenly turning to a few humanoid figures that had just appeared in the distance. Han Li was eavesdropping in the air above, and he also turned toward that direction. There he discovered that City Lord Lan and the young woman from the demon race had returned along with some other humans and demons. There was not a single spirit tribe being to be seen. During the battle outside the valley earlier, Profound Spirit Su Tian had thought that he'd be powerful enough to take on Spirit Lord Huang Liang and Xianxia on his own. However, to his surprise, the cultivation arts used by the two of them complemented one another, and they were able to enhance each other to a much greater degree than Su Tian had anticipated. As the battle wore on, Su Tian knew that he had no chance of victory, so he didn't dare to prolong the battle any longer, choosing instead to immediately retreat with all of the other spirit tribe beings. Otherwise, Xianxia and Spirit Lord Huang Liang wouldn't have been able to get into the valley so quickly. At this moment, the presence of so many people seemed to have reminded the Cyclops giant of some kind of traumatic experience, and a vicious light appeared in its eyes as it let loose a thunderous roar. It then lowered its head as piercing light erupted from its single eye, following which countless white strands shot forth in a frenzy, enshrouding both Xianxia and Spirit Lord Huang Liang. HMPH, I didn't think that it would have completely refined the setting sun crystal already, but it's dreaming if it thinks a few mere fire strands will hurt us. Spirit Lord Huang Liang harumphed coldly as he rustled a sleeve. That yin-yang mirror treasure appeared once again, swelling drastically to around the size of a fully grown man and positioning itself before him as a shield. As soon as the white light strands crashed into the mirror, brilliant spiritual light immediately erupted from the mirror's surface, rebounding all of the strands of light toward the giant's massive body. However, the strands of light simply disappeared into its body in a flash without being able to inflict any damage. On the other end, Xianxia had also conjured up a massive mirror before him, using spiritual power to reflect the oncoming strands of white light. This method of attack was clearly proving to be ineffective, so the giant immediately stopped blasting the strands of light out of its eye as it let loose a low snarl. At the same time, it spread open 5 fingers on one of its massive hands, before swinging it toward its two assailants with devastating force. Prior to the palm even coming into contact with the two of them, a burst of gale-force winds came sweeping forth first. Spirit Lord Huang Liang's expression darkened as he blasted a white paper fan out of his mouth. He grabbed the paper fan before waving it violently toward the gargantuan hand. All of a sudden, a gust of white wind appeared out of thin air, crashing into the gale-force winds swept up by the palm and keeping the latter at bay. Meanwhile, Xianxia rubbed his hands together, and an arc of gray lightning appeared. The lightning gradually changed shape between his hands, manifesting into a completely nondescript-looking silver saber. The saber looked sleek and sharp for sure, but it was completely dull and mundane. At the same time, Xianxia began to chant something, and strands of yellow fur began to sprout from his youthful face while its eyes turned into a sinister green color. After letting loose an almighty roar, devastating spiritual pressure erupted from his body. He slashed his saber gently through the air, and a gray line immediately shot forth. The gray line elongated dramatically to over 10 feet in length, before striking the thumb of the massive palm in a flash. The gray line was sharp to the extreme, and the giant only had a chance to shudder before its thumb detached itself from its hand. The giant let loose a howl of agony as it reflexively drew back its hand. The single eye on its forehead bulged and instantly became bloodshot with pain and rage. It glared intently at Xianxia as an expression of thunderous rage appeared on its hideous face. After unleashing that saber strike, the gray blade disappeared in a flash, and Xianxia's face paled significantly, as if that attack had expended a vast amount of his energy. Spirit Lord Huang Liang looked into the giant's furious crimson eye with a grim expression on his face as he said in a slow voice, "Take care, fellow Taoist Yuan. It looks like your attack has truly enraged it. Its next attack is most likely going to be rather difficult to deal with. I wonder how its regenerative abilities are, though. If it can immediately regenerate its thumb, then that won't be good news for us." "I know that much without you having to tell me, fellow Taoist Huang Liang. That attack was only to test its true power. The fact that its finger was cut down by me so easily suggests that it's just an ordinary giant. Looks like we have nothing to worry about now," Xianxia replied in a calm voice. However, before he'd even finished his sentence, a layer of green light suddenly surfaced over the cross-sectional wound on the giant's thumb. Amid the green light, bone and flesh grew in a frenzy, creating a brand new thumb that was identical to the previous one in the blink of an eye. The giant then moved the thumb experimentally, and it appeared to be just as agile as it was before, thereby rendering Xianxia's prior attack essentially completely ineffective. Xianxia faltered initially upon seeing this before drawing a sharp breath. An immortal body, Spirit Lord Huang Liang's pupils also contracted drastically. At this moment, the giant violently slammed its two gargantuan hands into the ground, causing the entire chaotic valley to tremor and quake. Its height suddenly doubled as it finally stood up from the ground. What came as even grimmer sight to Spirit Lord Huang Liang and Xianxia was that as soon as the giant stood up, it dug a black stone club out from the soil underfoot. The club was extraordinarily big, spanning almost half the giant's height in length. From the hints of azure light glistening over its surface, it appeared that this stone club had been constructed from the legendary azure spirit sand. This type of rare material was even heavier by mass than fine iron. If such a fearsome weapon were to crashing down at full force, there would be very few beings even at the mid-spatial tempering stage that would dare to take an attack from it head-on. It has a weapon as well. Looks like things really are getting troublesome. We'll have to fight at full power now. Spirit Lord Huang Liang's face twitched. "I'm well aware of that, fellow Taoist Huang Liang. Let's take this thing down together. We can't allow it to live," Xianxia declared expressionlessly before opening his mouth to let loose a low cry. Iridescent light flashed almost immediately thereafter in the sky, and a fist-sized moth appeared. It was none other than Xianxia's spirit insect, the mature illusionary flame moth. The moth fluttered its wings before its body instantly swelled drastically within the mesmerizing iridescent light, reaching around 10 feet in size in the blink of an eye. Meanwhile, yellow beastly fur that's several inches in length sprouted in a frenzy from Xianxia's body, and his nose and mouth also began to take on feral beastly characteristics. In the blink of an eye, he had transformed into a half-human and half-demon being. Spirit Lord Huang Liang sat down with his legs crossed and laid a hand over the top of his head, upon which a burst of yellow light surfaced, carrying a nascent soul that was around half a foot in size. The nascent soul's appearance was completely identical to Spirit Lord Huang Liang's, but it was wearing a suit of shimmering silver armor and wielding a small green sword in one hand, as well as a white jade seal in the other. Furthermore, the nascent soul appeared to be completely concrete, without the insubstantial quality most nascent souls possessed. The nascent soul abruptly opened its eyes before raising a hand to hurl the seal through the air. The seal immediately swelled to around an acre in size before crashing down directly toward the giant's head with devastating force. Meanwhile, Xianxia shot forth as a streak of light while swinging his claws through the air. A series of translucent claw projections surfaced in midair, tearing through space as they hurtled toward the giant. Immediately thereafter, Xianxia himself somehow disappeared into those claw projections. The giant let loose a thunderous roar of rage as beams of crimson pillars of light began to blast out of its eye. At the same time, it swung its stone club toward the oncoming seal with ferocious power. It also made a grabbing motion toward the ground down below with its other hand, drawing a massive clump of soil into its grasp. Yellow light flashed as the soil transformed into a massive rock that was several tens of feet in diameter. The giant drew back its arm before hurling the rock toward Spirit Lord Huang Liang with unerring accuracy. At this moment, the claw projection struck the crimson pillars of light amid a series of rumbling explosions. Following an even louder boom, the stone club slammed into the massive seal. The battle had officially commenced. Han Li spectated the battle from up above with tightly furrowed brows. Letter 1D65B, letter 1D4FB, letter 1D486, letter 1D486, letter 1D498, letter 1D65A, letter 1D658, letter 1D664, letter 1D662. As expected of a battle between spatial tempering cultivators and a legendary primordial giant, even the simplest of their movements were causing the world's origin chi to tremor violently around them. In particular, after Spirit Lord Huang Liang's nascent soul had left his body, the massive seal that it was using absorbed a vast amount of spiritual chi from the surrounding environment prior to every single attack, thereby significantly enhancing its power. Otherwise, despite the astonishing power of the seal itself, it would have never been able to withstand a few strikes from the stone club of the giant. Meanwhile, Xianxia's body was still one with the claw projections he had unleashed, and he was like an unfathomable vortex, constantly absorbing the spiritual chi around him. As for that Cyclops giant, every time it opened and closed its mouth, it was unintentionally inhaling and exhaling a vast amount of spiritual chi of far greater quantity than what Spirit Lord Huang Liang and Xianxia could summon, but the degree of purity was inferior in comparison. This was the first time that Han Li had witnessed a battle between spatial tempering stage beings at such close quarters, and he was unconsciously deriving insights and observations from the battle to assist in his one cultivation. It was quite a bountiful process for him. Just as Han Li was looking on with rapt focus, his expression suddenly changed as he turned his gaze toward a certain spot. There was clearly nothing there, and his spiritual sense couldn't detect anything either, but his spirit eyes that had been cleansed countless times by the brightside spirit water was able to identify a faint transparent shadow standing in midair, also spectating the battle down below. Su Tian. Even though Han Li's spirit eyes were unable to identify exactly who it was, it appeared that the only being capable of lurking here without being noticed would be this profound spirit. Han Li was ecstatic upon seeing this. To him, the more tumultuous the situation became, the better. Just as Han Li was observing the transparent shadow, the latter abruptly raised his head and also cast a glance toward Han Li's direction. Han Li's heart stirred upon seeing this. Thankfully, the shadow then immediately lowered his head again, leaving Han Li to wonder whether his cover had been blown or Su Tian had merely cast an errant glance his way as an unintentional gesture. Han Li's eyes narrowed, and an indecisive look appeared on his face. A fierce battle down below raged for half a day. The landscape in the chaotic valley had been ravaged so severely by the giant and the two spatial tempering stage beings that it was now completely unrecognizable. The terrain was completely riddled with massive craters, and the gray mist in the valley had been swept clean long ago by the enormous spiritual pressure emanating from the bodies of the three combatants. Furthermore, due to the drastic changes in the world's origin chi that the three had affected, the sky was filled with dark clouds and pelting with heavy rain at times, yet bright and scorching with sunlight during other times. There were even stretches where wind, snow, and hail were interspersed with storms of mud and rocks. Aside from the young woman in palatial robes and a few other deity transformation cultivators who could still spectate the battle from afar, everyone else had left the chaotic valley long ago in fear of dying as collateral damage during this battle for the ages. Cyclops Giant was just as ferocious as ever, and it appeared that he was completely indefatigable. However, Han Li could see that Spirit Lord Huang Liang and Huan Tianqi were intentionally employing guerrilla warfare tactics to wear the giant out, and even with the world's origin chi replenishing its body, the giant was still approaching the stage where it would soon be a spent force. All of its attacks had slowed down drastically, and it was only a matter of time before it was defeated. Sure enough, as Spirit Lord Huang Liang was distracting the giant with one attack, Huan Tianqi took the opportunity to slice off one of its toes. The giant bellowed in fury once again, but its severed toe was unable to regenerate on this occasion. Both Spirit Lord Huang Liang and Huan Tianqi's eyes lit up in unison upon seeing this. They knew that it was finally time for this battle to draw to conclusion. Brilliant yellow light radiated from Spirit Lord Huang Liang's nascent soul, and the small green sword in its hand abruptly shot forth. Green light flashed, and the small sword transformed into a peculiar spirit beast with the head of a falcon, the body of a horse, and a pair of azure-feathered wings. The spirit beast opened its mouth before pouncing toward the giant with ferocious might. The nascent soul then pointed a finger at the massive white seal that was hovering in the sky. In response, the seal began to rotate rapidly, transforming into a white smoky projection at the nascent soul's behest. All of a sudden, countless rays of light of different colors converged toward the massive seal, making its already astonishing stature expand even further. In just the span of a few breaths, the seal had swelled to several times its original size, seemingly filling up almost the entire sky. Huan Tianqi also stopped several hundred feet away from the giant. He raised both hands, and two balls of gray lightning surfaced at once amid a burst of rumbling thunderclaps. A massive gray blade several tens of feet in length then abruptly appeared. It didn't appear to be anything special, but the difference in power between this blade and the blade Huan Tianqi had employed earlier was night and day. Huan Tianqi glared coldly at the giant before suddenly waving a hand toward the massive moth that had been hovering above him this entire time. The moth immediately spread its wings, transforming into the streak of iridescent light that disappeared into the giant blade in the blink of an eye. Immediately thereafter, a cold, sinister light began to emanate from the giant blade, following which he slowly slashed it toward the giant's waist. A mesmerizing thin line shot forth in a flash. Even though the giant wasn't very intelligent, it could sense that it was in grave danger from these two devastating attacks unleashed by Spirit Lord Huang Liang and Huan Tianqi. It tilted its head back and let loose an almighty roar as white light abruptly flashed from its eye. A glistening white ball shot forth from within, transforming into a ball of white light that managed to keep the peculiar azure-winged spirit beast at bay. Immediately thereafter, crimson light flashed, and a burst of powerful light erupted from its eye, clashing directly with the oncoming vibrant thin line. A peculiar scene then ensued. After the thin line and the crimson light came into contact with one another, no explosive boom erupted as a result. Instead, the clash was completely silent before the two became locked in an intense impasse. In response to the massive white seal crashing down from above, the projection of a small mountain appeared around the stone club in the giant's hand, and it hurled the club directly at Spirit Lord Huang Liang. It then clenched its hands into massive fists, causing the anaconda-like veins beneath its skin to bulge, as it lashed out at the massive seal in the sky in a vicious strike. It was going to rely on its insane strength to take on the gargantuan seal with its bare hands. An earth-shattering boom erupted, and incandescent light erupted from the seal. Even Han Li couldn't help but close his eyes in the face of such scintillating light as he spectated from above. He then felt an astonishing wave of energy surging toward him, causing the air around him to churn violently and threatening to sweep him away. Han Li's heart jolted with shock as he immediately circulated his magic power to stabilize his body. When he opened his eyes again and looked down, he was flabbergasted by what he saw. A dense yellow cloud had appeared beneath him, completely obscuring the three combatants within. Han Li hesitated momentarily before slowly releasing his spiritual sense into the cloud. He could hear the enraged roar of the Cyclops giant intermingled with the deranged cackles of Huan Tianqi ringing out from within the cloud. This was interspersed by bursts of resounding explosions, and the entire cloud itself was also churning and surging violently. Spirit Lord Huang Liang remained silent throughout this entire process. Perhaps he was at a critical juncture of preparing a technique and couldn't divert his attention, or simply couldn't be bothered to speak, as he believed that this battle was already won. Han Li's heart stirred as he cast his gaze toward the transparent shadow in the distance, only to find that it had disappeared. A contemplative look appeared in Han Li's eyes as he directed his attention to the yellow cloud down below again. A resounding blood-curdling cry erupted from within the yellow cloud, following by an earth-shaking thump that made the entire valley quake violently, as if something absolutely colossal had fallen to the ground. All of the sounds within the cloud abruptly cut off. A peculiar look flashed through Han Li's eyes as he made a hand seal and began to descend from above. At the same time, Yuan Tianqi's triumphant laughter erupted from within the yellow cloud. It's a good thing that this idiot didn't have much intelligence. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to take care of it so quickly. That spirit tribe traitor must have been devoured by it. Let me slice open its body and see just what the spirit tribe traitor was carrying with it. I'll leave you to it then, Brother Huan. I've restricted that setting sun crystal as well, and I'll be handing that over to you shortly, Spirit Lord Huang Liang replied. The yellow finally gradually receded to reveal everything that was taking place down below. The Cyclops giant's body was riddled with wounds, and it was lying in a river of green blood. An arm and a leg were lying beside it, seemingly having been forcibly dismembered. Its massive head had also been completely pulverized, and less than half of it remained. There was also a gargantuan hole at the center of its chest, the edges of which had been entirely charred black. It appeared that it had been struck by some kind of Yang attribute treasure, destroying its heart in one fell swoop. That was most likely the lethal blow. Yuan Tianqi had already reverted back to his human form, and aside from the fact that his face appeared a little pale, he didn't appear to have been wounded at all. At present, he was manipulating a white flying saber to slice open the giant's gargantuan lower abdomen. Meanwhile, Spirit Lord Huang Liang was fiddling around with a white crystal ball, wearing a faint smile on his face as he did so. The crystal ball was none other than the setting sun crystal within the giant's body, but Spirit Lord Huang Liang seemed to have used some kind of technique to shrink it down dramatically. Back when we were last in the primordial world, I recall that we'd slain a two-eyed giant. That one was much more difficult to kill than this one. Direct confrontations with primordial giants really should be avoided if possible. They're not like other ancient beasts or heavenly spirit beasts. Even with such massive bodies, there's nothing useful to be procured. Killing one expends a lot of energy, but you gain nothing from it, Yuan Tianqi sighed as he continued to slice through the giant's stomach. Of course, under normal circumstances, we certainly wouldn't go around provoking giants in the primordial world. However, it may not necessarily be correct to say that we'll gain nothing from killing giants. I recall that divine wolf Celestial Kui of the 7 demon monarchs once slew a 7-headed giant and found a small clump of myriad dawn soil, thereby allowing it to refine the myriad dawn demon tower on the chaotic roll. Only then was it able to become one of the demon monarchs. Spirit Lord Huang Liang disagreed with a shake of his head. That's true. Primordial giants like to devour just about anything, so it's indeed possible to find some valuable treasures within their bodies. However, the chances of that happening are far too low. Who would fight a giant in the primordial world just to enter a lottery? In particular, primordial giants are normally pack-dwelling creatures. Have you forgotten that after we slew that two-eyed giant, we were almost forced to jump into the ocean to escape the 3-headed giant that came after us? A wry smile appeared on Yuan Tianqi as he recalled those memories. Spirit Lord Huang Liang also chuckled upon the recollection of these past events, and he didn't say anything further. After slicing through a certain section of the giant's body, a pile of stuff suddenly fell out. Everything else was already completely dull and lusterless, with the exceptions of a blue jade bowl and a translucent red vial, both of which were still radiating rays of spiritual light. The blue jade bowl was emanating a layer of faint blue light that just so happened to be shielding the small vial within. This should be it. Yuan Tianqi immediately identified the blue jade bowl as the true body of an artifact spirit tribe being. However, the spiritual nature of the bowl had completely faded, clearly indicating that the artifact spirit tribe being had fallen. The spirit tribe traitor had clearly given his life to protect that small vial, so it was most likely the object that they were looking for. An elated look appeared on Yuan Tianqi's face, yet just as he was about to reach out toward the small vial, Spirit Lord Huang Liang's expression suddenly changed drastically as he yelled, "Look out!" Xianxia was an immensely powerful being in his own right, and he sensed an extremely well-concealed sneak attack, aimed toward him from the shadows almost at the exact moment that Spirit Lord Huang Liang had cried out. In a fit of shock and rage, he didn't have time to do anything other than stomp a foot violently into the ground, catapulting himself straight into the air while a streak of crimson light glanced past the soles of his feet. A humanoid figure that was around a foot in size suddenly appeared nearby, before abruptly reaching toward the small vial. "Don't you dare!" Spirit Lord Huang Liang let loose an enraged roar as he flicked his 10 fingers rapidly toward the humanoid figure. A dozen or so yellow streaks of sword chi immediately swept forth, but he was clearly too late. The humanoid figure gave a triumphant laugh before sucking the small vial into his grasp. His body then swayed, and he flew away as a crimson cloud. "Su Tian, you're not getting away." Have just barely evaded that attack that would have sliced him in half. Xianxia circled around in midair and was furious after identifying his assailant. Spatial fluctuations suddenly proliferated from above the crimson cloud as a massive moth around 10 feet in size appeared at his behest. The moth's green eyes flashed as it immediately flapped its wings downward without any hesitation. A burst of 7-colored mist immediately descended toward the crimson cloud. The cloud seemed to be extremely wary of the colorful mist, as indicated by the fact that it was unwilling to come into contact with the mist, skirting around it instead as it fled toward another direction. However, during this split-second delay, the dozen or so streaks of yellow sword chi unleashed by Spirit Lord Huang Liang were already upon him. Spirit Lord Huang Liang himself was also charging toward him as a streak of yellow light. Su Tian's heart jolted upon seeing this. Right at this moment, a familiar voice suddenly sounded in his ear. "Master Su Tian, give the divine blood to me. I'm using a concealment technique, and I'll be able to get the divine blood out of this place." Su Tian faltered slightly upon hearing this, but he was quickly overjoyed. The one who had been spectating the battle with him up above was indeed Xian. Su Tian had an ability that allowed him to faintly detect the presence of one of his brethren nearby, but he couldn't be sure if there was actually someone there, and nor was he able to determine who it was. However, the familiar voice answered all of the questions in his heart. He raised on hand to defend himself against the oncoming streak of sword chi, while the small vial appeared out of nowhere in his other hand amid a flash of spiritual light. He flicked his wrist through the air, and the small crimson vial shot forth toward the direction where the voice had come from. The cloud of blood roiled and instantly condensed into a blood lotus that twirled around its body. Over 10 streaks of swordlight were absorbed into it. The small vial flew over 30 meters away and disappeared into emptiness in the blink of an eye. When Xianxia arrived and saw this, he let out a furious roar, spitting out a gray demon wind with it. Hail and sand and stone swept over the area Han Li was hidden. Although the demon wasn't able to see Han Li's figure, he was rich with battle experience. He was able to make out that a human using concealment techniques had seized the bottle. When Han Li saw the demon wind come to attack him, his expression faintly changed. After he concealed himself, it was impossible for him to immediately fly out of range of the demon wind. Once the wind brushed past him, it would immediately dispel his invisibility talisman. In that split second, Su Tian's face turned sullen, and he pointed at the engulfing winds with an incantation gesture. A red swordlight tore through the air from over the horizon and flew into his hand. It then flashed, cleaving through the demon winds and directly cutting at Xianxia. Frightened, Xianxia hastily reached out above him. A gray demon claw immediately appeared and cleaved at the incoming crimson light. The gray and red light intertwined, finding themselves in a deadlock for the time being. When Han Li saw this, he was elated and began to fly away, still concealed. But then a cold snort sounded from behind him. "Where do you think you're going?" He suddenly sensed something flash from the yellow mist, and a white jade seal strangely warped above his head. In a blur, it turned over 30 meters large and pounded down towards Han Li. The attack was lightning swift, Su Tian shouted, knowing it was too late for him to help. Han Li had already witnessed its might, and when the giant pounded it, it was entirely unscathed. He absolutely couldn't receive the strike. His expression wavered several times before he let out a sigh. As the jade seal pressed down, silver light flashed and revealed Han Li. Han Li slapped the roof of his head and summoned a small cauldron wrapped in azure light. He opened it to release a string of clear cries, followed by a barrage of countless azure threads. They quickly waved together a net of light to catch the seal above him. The seal continued to press down, dropping right on top of the net. A chain of explosions ruptured. The seal appeared unharmed as usual, and the azure net began to slowly crumble. However, the heaven-void cauldron was a divine spirit treasure. With another wave of azure threads, it completely halted the jade seal's momentum. And Li grasped his hands in an incantation gesture to use this opportunity. Thunder cried, followed by the appearance of azure-white wings on his back. His body seemed to twist as he turned into a white line, disappearing along with the small cauldron. When the seal broke free of the net of light, it naturally fell on top of nothing. At that moment, azure lightning flashed over 100 meters away where Han Li silently reappeared. "How are you able to control that treasure, Yuan Xian?" Su Tian's inconceivable voice sounded from within the blood cloud. Then it roiled to reveal a silhouette that was several inches tall. The profound spirit Su Tian looked at Han Li with furious alarm. "You aren't from the spirit clan. You're a human cultivator." Light flashed from the yellow mist to reveal Spirit Lord Huang Liang, looking at Han Li with an astonished fash. Yuan Tianqi used this opportunity to scatter the crimson sword light and flashed forward to Huang Liang's side, examining Han Li with bewilderment as well. Facing the spatial tempering stage existences, Han Li simply opened his mouth with an incantation gesture, formed and spat out a mist of blood. Soon after, a dense mist of blood enveloped him. "He wants to run." When Su Tian saw this, he saw that it was a profound movement technique, and he furiously shouted. Soon after, the blood cloud stirred beneath Han Li as if it were ready to pounce. Yuan Tianqi snorted and said, "Fellow Taoist Su Tian, there is no need to be so anxious. I merely want to experience your blood-fiend spirit lotus. Brother Han Li, since he's a human cultivator, you deal with him." His form then turned half-demon in an instant, and his body blurred as he pounced towards Su Tian. Huang Liang stared at Han Li and indifferently said, "Don't worry, he is a trifling deity transformation stage cultivator. Even with a spirit treasure, he will not escape me." He then glanced at the heaven-void cauldron at Han Li's side. As soon as those words were said, he opened his mouth and spat a small green sword. It blurred and arrived above the blood mist with worm-like agility. A clang lightly sounded as a golden light shot out from the mist. Although it was repelled from the impact, it managed to block the green sword. The golden light revealed itself to be a foot-long flying sword. Huang Liang sneered and pointed at his sword. The green streak flew, immediately intertwining with the flying golden sword. Under the bright clash, the golden light found itself further pressured and restrained, as the green streak began to revolve and turn into a meter-long wheel, revolving at a force that would crush anything in its path. A series of sharp metal clangs sounded, but strangely enough, the golden sword appeared almost entirely unscathed from the fierce blows apart from growing dimmer. Instead, the flying sword continued to forcibly tangle with the azure sword and distract it. Huang Liang let out a yelp and his face stirred. Although he hadn't refined the green sword from extraordinary materials, when he completed the first cycle of cultivation, he honed it with several thousand years of effort. Its might already was equivalent to spirit treasure, but now it was being repelled by the flying sword of a deity transformation stage cultivator. He was thoroughly shocked, but he retained a calm appearance and quickly formed an incantation gesture, causing his sword to let out a ring. It blurred as it turned into 36 identical copies. They all cleaved at the blood mist in a dense barrage of attack, intending on skewering Han Li's corpse. But what Huang Liang couldn't have expected was for Han Li's back to blur, summoning tens of small golden swords as well. They all flew out in sword streaks and blocked the azure lights, letting not one of them through. At that moment, the blood mist was growing violently unstable as Han Li continued to chant. His 10 fingers began to cycle through incantation gestures as if he was about to finish his spell. When Spirit Lord Huang Liang saw this, his astonishment was clear to see, but a cold glint soon shined from his eye. Soon after, yellow mist brightly lit up and he vanished. Han Li let out a deep sigh and suddenly crimson marks flashed on his brow, followed by the appearance of a black eyeball. It immediately released a thin beam of jet-black light before disappearing. 30 meters away, a loud boom shook the air. Yellow mist and black light flickered together to reveal Spirit Lord Huang Liang. He cried out in alarm, "You have such a treasure, an annihilating treasure." The spatial tempering stage cultivator wore a grim expression, but after some surprise, there was neither rage nor joy. He raised his hand and slowly reached his hand out in front of him. The sounds of tearing space erupted above Han Li's head, and the winds drew up a storm nearby. Countless threads of mist appeared in the nearby air, condensing into a ball of light in the blink of an eye. A 3-meter-long crystalline jade axe appeared in the air. Huang Liang made a first with his hand and waved down, uttering, "Cleave." The rainbow jade axe trembled and slowly moved down, but before the axe drew close, lightning rang. Balls of azure lightning flickered off of the axe, warping the nearby space it touched. The mite's axe was beyond what it displayed. As he still casted from within the blood mist, Han Li's expression changed. Without another thought, he opened his mouth and spat out a small black mountain. It trembled to release halos of gray light from its surface. Wherever the strange halo of light passed through any of the azure swordlights, they let out a wail and trembled uncontrollably as if they were stunned. The huge jade axe clearly wasn't comparable to the azure swordlight, however. It easily brushed past the halos and scattered them with ease. Han Li's heart grew tense, and the small mountain burst, suddenly condensing a dozen rings of light together into an incredibly dense halo. It disappeared with a tremble, suddenly reappearing nearby the jade axe and quickly wrapping around it. The rainbow light on the axe's surface pulsed in resistance, but then the axe suddenly lost control. Huang Liang was completely aghast by the sight of this. Without another thought, he shouted and released a chain of spell seals. Suddenly, the jade axe let out a roll of thunder, and a series of azure lightning bolts exploded, fiercely cleaving down and tearing through the gray halo. But that moment of delay bought Han Li just enough time. He suddenly blurred in a crimson streak and he left the blood mist. At an inconceivable speed, he arrived hundreds of kilometers away, a mere black speck in the horizon. As for his flying swords and the small black mountain, they disappeared as well. With his deity transformation stage cultivation and his fiercely powerful body, this life-saving evasion technique possessed inconceivable speeds. In several flickers, he already disappeared from sight. At that moment, Spirit Lord Huang Liang and the others ceased their fighting and looked into the distance with shock. The three yelled with alarm at nearly the same time and cast incantation gestures at nearly the same instant, streaking forward in furious pursuit. Several seconds later, the nearby skies were completely empty, the three flying at a speed nearly comparable to the Bloodshadow evasion. With the speed of the Bloodshadow evasion, Han Li had arrived at the valley's entrance in the span of a few breaths. With his current cultivation, he was finally able to do what he couldn't at core formation and nascent soul stage. He was able to control his direction with the overbearing speed of the technique. In the blink of an eye, Han Li arrived over 50 kilometers away, and he swept his spiritual sense past his surroundings. He discovered that Huang Liang and the others weren't far away and were in close pursuit. His heart couldn't help but tremble. Since they were all spatial tempering stage cultivators, Han Li didn't believe it would be so simple to escape them. Still within the crimson light, he flipped his hand, and two pearls sparkling with crimson-black talisman characters appeared in his hand. He quickly tossed them behind him and began to chant with his hands held in a gesture. At that moment, he continued to blur through the air in a crimson flash and swept past the entrance to the chaotic valley. Behind him, the three were still in quick pursuit. The two pearls spun and let out a drone before detonating in a world-shaking explosion. Black and red light turned into two 30-meter-wide blazing suns. To the naked eye, one could see waves of violent chi scattering around them like a storm. It completely engulfed the area of several kilometers. Of the three cultivators pursuing Han Li, Su Tian possessed the deepest cultivation and even used a secret technique to increase his speed. As a result, he was engulfed by the storm. As for the other two, they had more time to react and quickly change direction, thinking of flying around the dangerous storm. Nevertheless, both the human and the demon didn't let go of this opportunity to give a free hit to Su Tian. Yuan Tianqi's sleeve trembled and a gray demon wind roiled. Huang Liang waved his hand at the storm and released a yellow beam of light. The two attacks entered the storm and let out a large explosion. Su Tian's furious roar immediately followed. Seeing that Su Tian was somewhat harmed, he would be occupied for some time. The pair grinned at each other and then made their way to the valley entrance. Because of the delay caused by the immortal vanquishing pearls, Han Li already turned into a blur on the horizon. The two didn't take the distance to heart as the two were confident they would be able to catch up using their secret techniques. But then, two wounds cracked from the stone walls of the valley. Silver light flashed, and two pillars of silver flames moved to engulf them. Because Because the flames traveled at immense speed within the narrow valley, it arrived before them in the blink of an eye. Spirit Lord Huang Liang chopped his hand through the air without another through, striking down the flames with a yellow sword streak. But as soon as the sword streak touched the flame, it was consumed entirely. The silver flame didn't stop there and rushed towards them with even greater momentum. The rolling temperatures left the cultivator completely dried out. Huang Liang's expression vastly changed, and she shouted, "Spirit-extinguishing bone flame." Soon after, he grasped his hands in an incantation gesture, and he disappeared. The flame pillar engulfed the area where he once was. Yuan Tianqi found himself in a similar situation. He cast a demon wind, but the silver flames cleanly engulfed it. He astonishedly blurred several times in response and let several afterimages in his place to escape the flame. Yuan Tianqi looked at Huang Liang's still figure with an unsightly expression and explained, "No, it isn't spirit-extinguishing bone flame. The white bone flame may be silver, but it is also filled with evil qi. Only ancestor white bone can control them and no one else." The two silver flames then condensed at the center to reveal a 3-meter-wide fireball. It shrunk several times in size to reveal a graceful silver flame bird. A fire spirit, the two were startled to see one. However, the silver flame bird coldly stared at the two before gently flapping its wings. Silver light flickered and countless fist-sized fireballs appeared nearby. A clear ring sounded and the fireballs trembled, enveloping the two in a dense barrage of attacks from every direction. When Huang Liang heard that it wasn't that spirit-extinguishing bone flame, he felt a wave of relief, and when he saw the fireballs, he snorted coldly. He waved his hand, wildly expanding an 8-trigram mirror in front of him. To his side, Yuan Tianqi flipped his hand to produce a ball of silver lightning. Although the two didn't know the true nature of the silver flames, they couldn't treat it with contempt and would have to deal with it using full force. But at that moment, the fireballs that were about to strike them brightly glowed and trembled before disappearing. The roasting temperatures nearby seemed to completely disappear along with the fireballs. In his alarm, Huang Liang then narrowed his eyes as he looked at the silver flame bird. Under his stare, he heard a light bang. The flame bird combusted of its own accord. It scattered like the fireballs and strangely disappeared. With a sullen expression, he turned to look at Yuan Tianqi. The Jasper Mouse clan elder wore an ashen expression. As doubt flickered through his eyes, Yuan Tianqi coldly said, "Even if the flames weren't the spirit-extinguishing bone flames, they were still significant. I've never heard of a cultivator like that before." Huang Liang shook his head and glanced in the direction outside the valley. He coldly laughed and said, "I don't recognize him. Perhaps he is a cultivator from another region. In any case, this is the first time I've seen him in the heaven origin region. But for a lone person to use such small tricks to escape our grasp, we must have been quite arrogant." Although it's too late to place a spiritual sense marker on his body, with our vastly powerful spiritual sense, we should be able to find him in the setting sun tomb if he hasn't escaped over 5,000 kilometers away. At the moment, Han Li had already disappeared past the edge of the sky. Yuan Tianqi nodded and agreed. Afterwards, the two closed their eyes and slowly expanded their immensely powerful spiritual sense. After just a moment of time, their faces revealed wonder and astonishment as if they couldn't believe what they sensed. How can this be possible? All traces of his spiritual power have disappeared. Not a single trace. Huang Liang opened his eyes to reveal shock. I also couldn't find it. Even if he died, traces of his aura should have remained for a short time, Yuan Tianqi muttered. Either his cultivation was far beyond ours, or he used a peculiar technique to conceal his aura from our spiritual sense. Spirit Lord Huang Liang frowned. It must be the second reason. Don't forget, this person was already concealed nearby, yet we weren't able to find him. It seems that this person must be skilled in formidable concealment techniques. How troublesome. With those abilities we won't be able to find him. Yuan Tianqi's cheek twitched. That might not be certain. We might have another opportunity. Now that he's concealed himself, he won't be able to travel far with his movement techniques. He should be around 1,000 kilometers away. So long as we utilize our subordinates, the entire area will be under our control. Besides, with your illusion flame moths, 1,000 moth technique, I am confident we won't be able to hide from us forever. A cold glint flashed from his eyes. The 1,000 moth technique would wear down their vitality, but I guess there is no other choice. It will be worth it to use this technique. However, as for that setting sun crystal, Xianxia reluctantly nodded and then dropped his gaze to the treasure in Huang Liang's hand. Having already decided on the matter, Huang Liang answered, so long as we acquire that item from the spirit clan, I will give the crystal. Even if you can't find him, I'll split the crystal in half. Good, that will be fine. Xianxia smiled and wanted to say something else when they heard a long screech from behind them, along with a heaven-shattering eruption. An astonishing spirit wave spread throughout the sky. The two felt their hearts tremble, and they quickly turned around. Not far away, the storm from the immortal vanquishing beads had already disappeared. There was a 30-meter-wide blood lotus twirling through the air along with a person at its center, staring at them with an icy, ominous gaze. It was Su Tian, who the two had struck while he was down. Xianxia displayed not even a trace of fear and calmly said, "Fellow Taoist Su Tian, you still wish to fight us. The person who deceived you has escaped to who knows where. Let us stop for the time being. It might be likely he'll escape." Su Tian glanced around him to find no trace of Han Li. Then he glared at the two and coldly snorted, "I have no choice but to let you go for now. But if there is a chance in the future, I will be sure to test your skills." Afterwards, the blood lotus petals beneath him closed together. Then it shrieked through the valley at piercing speeds. Not long after, it could no longer be seen. Huang Liang and the demon didn't take the spirit cultivator's threat very seriously. Not only is it impossible for spirits to remain in the human and demon domains for long, but the two held the advantage when their forces were combined. Afterwards, the two had a brief discussion before heading in their own ways. They prepared to gather their men and seal off an area over 1,000 kilometers wide. Not even a fly or mouse would be able to make it through. At that moment, Han Li was now at a small mountain over 1,000 kilometers away. He had a vastly changed appearance on his face. He was a shorter, middle-aged man with long facial hair. His body completely lacked spiritual qi, as he now appeared to be a run-of-the-mill body refiner. He was meditating on a boulder with an expressionless face. A while later, Han Li opened his eyes and wore a faint smile. He muttered, "The last thread of spirit flames in my body has been extinguished. Unless they personally examined me, they wouldn't be able to recognize them." Even so, Han Li made no attempt to leave. Even with his appearance and aura altered, Han Li had no desire to risk any danger. From then on, he leaped off the boulder and jumped several times, skirting off the mountain. Not long after, he found himself in front of a cliff covered in dense vines and shrubs. Han Li swept his gaze around him and nodded with a satisfied smile. Then he took a deep breath and began to pound against the cliff with fists shining in golden light. Huge rumbles sounded out, and a 10-meter deep cave appeared. His figure blurred as he strangely shifted into it. Then inside the cave, he struck above him, instantly covering the entrance in a pile of rubble and sealing it. The cave immediately became pitch black. He didn't mind this in the slightest, and summoned a prepared moonlight stone into his hand with a flip of his palm. He grabbed the stone and slapped it at the top of the cave. With immense force, the moonlight stone easily embedded itself. Under the faint crystalline light, the stone cave became clear. And Li looked for a clean area to sit down. Light flashed from his spirit ring, and he fetched a small crimson vial from his storage bracelet. He examined it with curious eyes. Letter 1D453, letter 1D633, letter 1D626, letter 1D452, letter 1D464, letter 1D452, letter 1D450, letter 1D45C, letter 1D45A. Apart from a continuous red glow, the vial appeared quite ordinary. It had a common glossy surface like porcelain. As he stroked the vial with his finger, he inwardly muttered and began to think of the spirit Xian's memories relating to divine blood. A long while later, he frowned and he took out a palm-sized jade alms bowl. He then opened the vial and tilted it over the bowl. A purple light flowed out from the vial, slowly dripping a deep purple liquid into the alms bowl. It appeared unable to mix into the bowl. Han Li narrowed his eyes and closely examined it for a long while before extending his finger to touch the liquid. As a result, the purple liquid seemed to jump up of its own accord and wrap around his finger as if it wanted to enter. However, Han Li raised his brow and golden light flashed from his flesh, stopping the purple drop in its tracks. Then, with a flick, he dropped the liquid back into the bowl. Not bad, it really is the spirit tribe's divine blood. A trace of interest lit up in Han Li's eyes. Afterwards, he put the purple liquid back into the vial and carefully placed it back into his storage bracelet. He now felt at ease to rest peacefully in the cave. Although he currently possessed no magic power, he still had no need to eat or drink. Not long after, a sliver of spiritual sense swept past Han Li. When it sensed that Han Li's body didn't possess any spiritual qi, it brushed past him and ignored his existence. Several days later, threads of spiritual sense often swept past the area, number up to 12 times in a day. But after half a month, it eventually died down to 2 or 3 times. 2 months later, a spiritual sense that was far more powerful than the others swept past him, but Han Li remained calm, hidden inside the cave. Then a half-year passed without another reemergence of spiritual sense. When Han Li sensed this change, he rejoiced. But he waited several more months before he opened his eyes and broke down the pile of rubble blocking the cave entrance. He slowly walked out and took a look around him. When he saw there was nothing out of the ordinary, he waved his sleeve with a chuckle and leaped down the mountain like a shooting star. Not long after, he disappeared into the mountain forests. A year later, in a small city relatively close to Setting Sun City, a young body refiner with an unfamiliar face arrived at the city. He hurriedly purchased a few items and left as quickly as he arrived. This was because rumors of the missing divine blood slowly began to spread. When a few of the cultivators and body refiners that participated in the battle with the 3 races verified the matter, it became a hot topic in the following years. People clicked their tongues in wonder at the thought of a trifling deity transformation stage cultivator seizing the prize from 3 spatial tempering stage opponents. Unwilling to give up, Spirit Lord Huang Liang investigated this matter for a good number of years after returning from the city, completely focusing his attention on finding the identity of this cultivator. As a result, he found nothing. Although the cultivator displayed several powerful abilities, there was no trace of him as if he hadn't existed before that day. After another 2 years passed, Spirit Lord Huang Liang left Setting Sun City and arrived at a wild territory as he previously agreed with Yuan Tianqi. This hadn't captured anyone's interest as the matter of the divine blood had long passed. Several years later, at a huge mountain far from human civilization, there was a pitch-black room inside the mountain where a human was meditating with golden light sparkling from his body. At his side was a small crimson bottle. It laid flat on the ground as if it were empty. The person sat motionless and cross-legged. If it were for the faint signs of breathing, he may as well have been a statue. To a mortal, 100 years would most likely signify the end of their lifespan, but to a cultivator with profound magic power, it was only the blink of an eye. After 100 years, the still mountain suddenly had a squadron of wolf-mounted cavalry. They were slowly traveling through the mountain while escorting several decorated beast carriages. There were 3 people in one of the carriages: an old man with graying hair, a 7-year-old boy with a dignified appearance, and a frail girl of the same age. The old man had a face full of wrinkles, but the body below his neck appeared as strong and fit as any young person, but his hands appeared to belong to the dried branches of an old tree. Strangely enough, the old man's fingernails were not only several inches long, but they were also exceptionally sharp. The red light they displayed was also quite mysterious. The boy and girl sitting across from him couldn't help but stare at his nails with wonder. The old man made no effort to conceal his nails and simply looked at the children with a silent smile. Suddenly, a beast hoof sounded from the window and man's voice suddenly said, "Reporting to Elder Huo, the vanguard has returned. The beasts within a 500-kilometer perimeter of Cloud Dress Mountain have been exterminated." The old man's face stirred and he raised his hand to open the window curtains. "Good, good. With this, my business can open a new trade route without much problem." He saw a middle-aged cavalryman saddled on a snow-white wolf. He was facing the carriage with a respectful face. The old man glanced at the cavalryman and gravely said, "However, are you certain that all the demon beasts on the mountain were slain? It is common for demon beasts skilled on concealment techniques to hide their aura." The cavalryman's face slightly changed, but he quickly replied with a tone of certainty, "That isn't possible. In addition to demonic chi, I have asked many cultivators to sweep the mountain with their spiritual sense. There are definitely no demon beasts on the mountain." Oh, so it was like that. It seems there shouldn't be a problem. Although the cultivators are only at core formation stage, the mountain shouldn't have any demon beasts at too high a level. In that case, please continue forward. The old man nodded his head and uttered a word of praise. But just as he thought to close the window curtain, the sky suddenly changed. The sounds of an earth-breaking disaster sounded from a distance, followed by continuous thunder and the darkening of the sky. Whistling winds tore through the air. The vast change in the weather occurred in only the blink of an eye, all before the old man could close the curtains. This is. The middle-aged cavalryman glanced up and stared at the clouds gathering at the peak of the huge mountain. The old man frowned and pounded the top of the carriage 3 times. The carriage slowed and came to a stop. The old man stepped outside and looked up at the top of the mountain. Soon his face vastly changed. The old man couldn't help but look at a distant mountain peak with bafflement. Heavenly tribulation. There is a cultivator undergoing tribulation. How strange, it seems unlike minor or greater tribulation. On the huge mountain top, the sky had turned pitch black and gold and silver lightning bolts danced across the black clouds. Their faint rumbles filled the distant air. White gales shrieked down to ground below and continuously struck the mountain top, cutting through trees and splitting rocks. At that moment, the entire caravan came to a stop, and the cavalryman stared the odd scene completely dumbstruck. A few other members in the caravan soared into the air and circled once before flying to the old man's side. The yellow-robed youth with a handsome face seemed to be the leader of the group. He descended next to the old man and respectfully asked, "Elder Huo, can you see what sort of heavenly tribulation that senior is undergoing? It doesn't seem to be minor tribulation. Could it be a spatial tempering stage senior is hidden in the mountain?" His voice carried a faint trace of excitement. This came as no surprise. Cultivators at spatial tempering stage and higher were a rare sight even in the spirit realm. The old man shook his head and said, "It isn't greater tribulation. I've seen one before and the lightning was purple and golden. Its might was far greater than this one." The yellow-robed youth wore an odd expression and said, "However, minor tribulation isn't golden. It should be azure. I've seen my sect elders undergo it several times." The old man wore a solemn expression and doubtfully said, "It seems harsher than ordinary minor tribulation, but it can't be the metamorphosis tribulation of a demon beast. That has only silver lightning." When the core formation cultivators saw that Elder Hugh was unsure, they wore disappointed expressions. The winds in the sky have already become more frequent and strong. A windstorm seemed to envelop the area 50 kilometers around the mountain. Black clouds also began to pressure the ground underneath. As a result, Elder Hugh began to mutter to himself and order the caravan to form a circle for the time being and calmly wait for the tribulation to end before continuing forward. As the sounds of thunder continued to ring, the silver-gold lightning suddenly burst with greater ferocity. It roiled from cloud to cloud and began to strike down in a dense barrage akin to a rainstorm. As this continued, the silver lightning struck the mountain, breaking apart its top with explosions of dust and rock, easily cleaving the top of the mountain with blinding silver light. As for the golden lightning, it seemed to disappear upon touching the mountain. Soon after, thunder began to clap from the center of the mountain. A muffled explosion seemed even louder than the fierce claps of thunder from the sky. This came as a shock to Elder Huo and the other core formation cultivators. The golden lightning was odd in a heavenly tribulation and wasn't blocked by the mountain rock in the slightest, directly striking the target of the tribulation. This strange scene was something that only occurred with the purple-gold lightning of greater tribulations. Letter 1D487, letter 1D4FB, letter 1D4E, letter 1D4E, letter 1D66C, letter 1D65A, letter 1D4EC, letter 1D4F8, letter 1D4AT. Could it be a type of greater tribulation that the old man had never seen before? As these doubts welled in the hearts of these cultivators, a piercing azure light shot out from the center of the mountain. In a blur, it emerged from the center of the mountain, containing a faint silhouette. When the spectators saw this, they knew the person inside the azure light was certain to be the cultivator of great ability undergoing the tribulation. Unbeknownst to them, this person had emerged from the mountain since it did nothing to block the golden tribulation lightning. He felt that he would better deal with the tribulation's might in a wider area. At that moment, the golden and silver lightning striking the huge mountain swiftly changed targets to the azure light. A long shriek sounded from the azure light, and azure light flashed from above the person's head. A huge cauldron appeared, and its lid opened in a blur. A dense mass of azure threads shot out from the cauldron and fluttered through the air, concealing about half of the sky. The azure threads completely absorbed the silver lightning into the cauldron, but the golden lightning was still unaffected and brushed past the threads to strike at the person below. "Good, good, good." The person in the azure light seemed surprised, but he laughed at the unexpected result. The person clutched his hands together and raised them to the air. Thunder deafeningly rang and 2 dense bolts of lightning wildly flashed. Soon after, they spread out, creating a huge net of lightning above him. In the blink of an eye, the two types of golden lightning struck one another, resulting in a crackling explosion. Afterwards, they dissolved into countless thin golden arcs that jumped through the air in a gorgeous display. The elder Hugh and the others were dumbstruck by the sight. Many cultivators practiced lightning-attributed techniques in the spirit realm, but when common lightning touched tribulation lightning, they were unable to block it. Rather, the tribulation lightning would absorb it and turning it against its owner. The cultivator undergoing tribulation in front of them not only cultivated lightning ability on par with tribulation lightning, but he actually dared to use it to block tribulation lightning. He never heard of someone with the gall to do such a thing. However, the silver and golden lightning dropping from the black clouds seemed unending. In the time it took for an incense stick to burn, the lightning continued to strike and with increasing ferocity. The lightning was originally as thick as a thumb, but now it was as thick as an arm. At that moment, the figure in the azure light had a faintly changed expression, because the huge cauldron seemed to absorb as much lightning as it could hold. The azure threads seemed to be fewer, and it began to block even less silver lightning. As a result, a large quantity of silver lightning began to rain down on the person's golden net, draining the net's strength to near the point of exhaustion. The core formation cultivators looked at each other in dismay. Their leader, the yellow-robed youth, muttered, "This absolutely isn't minor tribulation. Even the tribulation of a consummate deity transformation cultivator isn't this powerful." Elder Hugh, having witnessed this power, suddenly said, "No, I have heard of this kind of tribulation before." "Is that true, Elder Hugh?" The yellow-robed youth quickly turned to the old man. "Yes, I have heard someone mention it once before. However, it was so long ago that I can't remember it clearly," the old man said with a deeply contemplative expression. After all, he wasn't a cultivator. In his advanced age, his memory has begun to weaken. The core formation cultivators felt somewhat anxious, but Elder Hugh was a peak-grade body refiner with power that could rival a nascent soul cultivator. None dared to urge him to remember. A core formation cultivator noticed a change in the sky and suddenly shouted, "Oh no, that senior doesn't seem to be able to hold on." When the others heard this, they looked over in alarm, and Elder Hugh snapped out of his contemplation and quickly looked up. They saw the tribulation lightning suddenly change. The arcs of lightning were replaced with head-sized balls of gold and silver lightning. It was as if a goddess, flowers were drifting down from the heavens. The balls of lightning were clearly more powerful than the arcs that struck down. Under the dense and numerous attack, the cauldron was no longer able to endure and let out a mournful drone before withdrawing its threads and shrinking to the size of a fist. In a streak of light, it flew back into the person's body. It was clear the treasure suffered grave damage. The person still continued to channel golden lightning through his hands, but the golden net was soon about to collapse. Eventually, the net was scattered inches at a time under the barrage of lightning balls. Just as the spectators believed that the cultivator was about to fail his tribulation, the silhouette to let a bone-chilling snort, and he slapped the back of his head to produce a gray, misty light. He then opened his head to spit out a pitch-black inch-large rock. When the gray mist spread itself to receive the balls of lightning, an inconceivable event occurred. Regardless of the color of balls of lightning, the gray light immediately stopped the balls in their tracks. They appeared as if they were suspended in the air by an invisible force. The gray light appeared to only have this kind of power against the lightning balls and could do nothing else. But as lightning balls continued to drop down, it continued to gather them up with ease. Although the gray mist was only 100 meters wide, in the blink of an eye, it amassed an overflowing number of lightning balls. It appeared filled to the brim as if it could hold no more. At that point, the person formed an incantation gesture at the inch-large rock in front of him. It surged into a 40-meter-tall mountain instantly. Immediately, after the silhouette let out a deep and cryptic incantation. Waves of light challenged through the entire surface of the pitch-black mountain, and gray rings began to fly off the mountain, sweeping past the suspended lightning balls. An incredible scene followed. When the gray rings began to sweep past them, the balls of lightning faintly trembled, but they didn't have any greater effect. However, the gray mist seemed to ripple, and those ripples soon began to warp. The balls of lightning eventually grew unstable as the gray mist twisted with greater intensity, causing the balls to strike one another and explode ferociously, scattering countless arcs of lightning everywhere. Following that, the gray rings trembled, and the arcs of lightning seemed to be brought under their control, striking down at the pitch-black mountain in a uniform manner. The person in the azure light then continued, using the gray mist to dissolve the balls, and using the small mountain to absorb the resulting loose lightning. These actions appeared to be done with ease, but in the person's heart he was cursing without end. Although the divine essence-effused light possessed fantastical abilities, and he could draw on the essence-effused mountain to deal with the tribulation lightning, it consumed astronomical amounts of magic power. Of course, the person in the azure light was Han Li, who cultivated in the mountain for over 100 years. At that moment, not only did he cultivate the Vajra arts to full completion, but he reformed his dissolved nascent soul with the aid of spirit medicines. He completely didn't expect that heavenly tribulation would strike down on him the moment he reformed his nascent soul. Caught unprepared, he had no choice but to deal with it using force. After a dozen more waves of lightning balls rained down, Han Li's magic power had taken a steep dive, consuming a majority of it, but the tribulation didn't seem to be exhausting its lightning anytime soon. Han Li's face paled. Although he possessed many abilities, there weren't many that could block the heavenly tribulation. As for the flame bird he refined from Xian's heavenly flame, it has been withdrawn into the body of his nascent soul since the start of tribulation. As the Sink Devils and Weeping Soul Beast were sentient, they cowered before tribulation and weren't very useful in this regard. The 8-spirit ruler and the 6 divines talisman were suitable treasures, but they had been destroyed in the journey through the spatial node. Now he was left with sparsely few countermeasures, all of which he had prepared as last reserve life-saving measures, but he was still found wanting. But how could a minor tribulation in the spirit realm be so formidable? If they were all this frightening, how could other deity transformation stage cultivators survive? He didn't believe that each one of them was even more powerful than he was. There must be some trick to surviving it. As he sullenly thought this, he regretted not doing more research on minor tribulations. Of course, Han Li couldn't have known that what he was experiencing was far beyond what a minor tribulation could amount to. Even with his several heaven-defying abilities and his 2 top-grade treasures, the Heaven Void Cauldron and the Essence-effused Mountain, a normal deity transformation stage cultivator would have already perished under the first wave. Now he let out a deep sigh, and a crimson light faintly shined from his body, as if something was about to emerge. At that moment, over a kilometer outside the area of Han Li's tribulation, space fluctuated, followed by the appearance of a formation of white light. The light formation was only about 30 meters wide, and had talisman characters drifting within it with blinding light. Although Han Li was mostly focused on blocking the tribulation, the strange appearance of the formation hadn't escaped his notice. His heart trembled and a crimson streak flickered from his body. As he continued to use the divine essence-effused light to block the lightning balls, he turned his head coldly over. It was no wonder Han Li was so cautious. During a crucial moment of calamity, an odd item he's never heard of suddenly appeared near him. However, the formation of light appeared rather familiar, much like. When Han Li swept his spiritual sense past the spell formation, he began to ponder. As the formation of white light droned, it flashed, and a square golden boat suddenly sprang forth from it. The boat seemed to be forged from pure gold with exquisite detail, and it was also covered densely in faint silver talisman characters. When Han Li saw those talisman characters, his face faintly changed. The silver rune scripts, they were actually spirit scripts from the spirit realm. The golden boat was about 20 meters long, and its surface was engraved in talisman characters of the rune script. The huge light formation seemed to be a teleportation formation without a base. Han Li felt shocked. But what astonished him even more was the yellow dome barrier at the center of the boat. It appeared incredibly thick, preventing even his powerful spiritual sense from looking inside. Shortly after the golden boat appeared, the formation of light beneath it crumbled away inches at a time. Meanwhile, the yellow barrier at the center of the golden boat disappeared to reveal 2 cultivators wearing golden battle armor. One of them appeared quite elderly, either in his 60s or 50s, and wore a goatee. The other appeared to be only in his 30s, and he had a white complexion with no facial hair. The silver rune scripts were also engraved into the 2 cultivators' armor, and would also have these talisman characters occasionally float around them. It was clear to see that the 2 sets of armor possessed great value. Just as Han Li swept his spiritual sense past them, the divine essence-effused light above him trembled, nearly on the brink of destruction. Spatial tempering stage cultivators. One of them is even at mid-spatial tempering stage. How could such characters appear here and right as he was undergoing tribulation? Could it be that they've come for him? As Han Li looked at the two, he wore an unsightly expression. From the distance, the caravan naturally saw the sudden appearance of the golden boat and the two gold-armored cultivators. For a time the core formation cultivators were left in a daze, but when Elder Hugh saw them, his face vastly changed in shock and he shouted out, "The Golden Court boat, the Deep Heaven Guards." The Deep Heaven Guards. Could it be that Senior has a relationship with Deep Heaven City? When the yellow-robed cultivator heard this, their faces turned snow-white with disbelief. Elder Hugh stared at the boat and vacantly muttered, "I've got it. That person is truly undergoing minor tribulation, but he must be a rare cultivator that ascended from a lower realm. He also hadn't cleaned his essence with the earth-exterminating pill, causing two-colored tribulation lightning to claim his life. Those Deep Heaven Guards must have sensed the tribulation and have sent help, but what's more strange is that they would be in the area to begin with." The core formation cultivators were left even more shocked by what they heard. Soon, everything seemed to verify the old man's words. When the two spatial tempering stage cultivators appeared from the boat, they looked at the balls of lightning hailing down from Han Li's tribulation. The two betrayed some astonishment at seeing him able to still hold out. Nevertheless, one of them immediately raised their hand and released a purple talisman from his hand. As soon as it left his hand, it let out a thunderous clap and transformed into a 30-meter-tall person of light wrapped by purple lightning. The figure had its arm crossed and its upper body was bare, emitting a ferocious aura. However, its face was blurred and only a long mustache could be made out. As for the other armored cultivator, he released an azure and a gold talisman. When the two talismans were released, they let out thunderous light and turned into a 3-meter-large azure spike and a golden hammer. The two items were wrapped in azure sparks and golden lightning respectively, releasing an astonishing pressure. The other cultivator began to solemnly cast spell seals into the huge light figure. Suddenly, the giant of light reached out to the azure spike and the golden hammer, two weapons formed from talismans, and promptly summoned them into its hands. As for the one who released the weapons, he began to chant in conjunction with his companion. The giant raised its head and let out a dragon's roar. It raised its hand and pointed the azure spike in Han Li's direction. Then, it fiercely swung down with the hammer. A huge bang resounded, followed by heaven-shaking lightning. Purple lightning sparked from the entire giant. The golden hammer and the azure spike both let out a blinding glare. A streak of purple, azure, and golden lightning poured out from the all. At first it was thin, but in the blink of an eye it became thicker and longer, quickly expanding from 10 meters long to over 300. At the peak of its expansion, the lightning took the form of a tricolored true dragon. Its radiant visage even lit up the nearby skies. The display left the spectators dumbstruck. The giant streak of lightning disappeared in an instant and reappeared above Han Li. Lightning zapped and tricolored light flashed. Below, Han Li's heart sank and his breath turned shallow, but immediately after he let out a sigh of relief. The huge arc of lightning had changed direction and struck the black sky. Soon after, crackles sounded as various colored lightning wildly danced through the skies. The balls of lightning that were originally hailing down quickly became rare. When Han Li saw this, he felt great surprise at the fact those two had suddenly assisted him in passing through his tribulation, but he wasn't about to refuse the favor. And without another thought, his figure dropped back to the ground. The tribulation cloud was extremely dangerous, so he may as well use the opportunity to create more distance. Just as he created more distance between him and the tribulation cloud, the huge tricolored lightning dragon reappeared, but its entire body soon dissolved. Countless tricolored lightning jumped across the clouds, and a roll of lightning shook the air. In the blink of an eye, the incredibly dense tribulation clouds turned sparse, and beams of sunlight began to shine through in the spans of a few breaths. This minor tribulation had actually been broken. Before Han Li showed his joy, he first retrieved the divine essence effused light and mountain, then turning to face the golden boat. From the distance, the golden board calmly drifted closer, and soon the two gold-armored cultivators could be clearly seen. Letter 1D4F, letter 1D4FB, letter 1D486, letter 1D658, letter 1D498, letter 1D4E, letter 1D4FF, letter 1D658, letter 1D4F8, letter 1D662. Han Li frowned, faintly sensing that trouble had come knocking on his door. He stood still in place and quietly waited. The golden boat appeared at ease, but it was still deceptively swift. It silently arrived before Han Li in the span of a few breaths as the two gold-armored cultivators closely examined Han Li. The pale 30-year-old cultivators eventually spoke with a neutral tone. "You're a cultivator that ascended from a lower realm. It is quite strange for early deity transformation stage cultivators to do such a thing. Regardless, it is your good fortune that we've arrived. Follow us." "What do you mean, Senior? Where will we go?" When Han Li heard that they mentioned he came from the lower realms, his heart skipped a beat, but he maintained a calm face. The pale cultivator's lip twitched and he calmly replied, "What do I mean? When you ascended, there were problems. Since you didn't appear at the Spirit Flight Tower or serve Deep Heaven City, a spatial storm appeared during your tribulation as someone that ascended through a spatial tier." Spirit Flight Tower. Han Li was initially confused when he heard this, but a trace of surprise soon appeared on his face. The older of the two cultivators then smiled and explained, "That's right, there are over 1,000 people that ascended to the spirit realm from the lower realm. Each lower realm has a special spirit flight tower for them. Normally, cultivators that ascend immediately appear at Deep Heaven City. However, there are rarely those like yourself that encounter mishaps during their ascension and land in other areas. Because these people haven't taken any earth cleansing pills, they will encounter two-colored lightning during their first tribulation and perish. Fortunately, you came across us while we were on business and waived your life." The older golden-armored cultivator explained, "You haven't consumed the earth cleansing pill and cleanse your body of the aura of the lower realm you came from. It will cause your minor tribulation to become two-colored. Even if you are vastly powerful, there will be no way for you to survive it. This time, we've helped you disperse of the tribulation, but as a result, the next tribulation will come earlier. In 100 years, you will experience your second tribulation. So long as you consume an earth cleansing pill every year, it will change your aura to one native to the spirit realm, preventing your tribulation from becoming two-colored. Our Deep Heaven City gives one to every ascended cultivator each year. If your tribulation remains two-colored, it will become a third greater in power than the last." Han Li blinked and asked, "Senior, does that mean I will have to live the rest of my life at Deep Heaven City?" The pale cultivator insipidly said, "Of course not, so long as you consume the earth cleansing pill for 300 years, you'll cleanse yourself of the aura from your lower realm and be freed of Deep Heaven City. Deep Heaven City may be a place where ascended cultivators gather, but you can't be giving away the pills for free. What are we tasked to do?" Han Li asked without further delay. "Letter 1D4BB, letter 1D4C7, letter 1D452, letter 1D626, letter 1D638, letter 1D452, letter 1D4B8, letter 2134, letter 1D628. The older cultivator stroked his beard and smiled. "Fellow Taoist is quite intelligent. Although the earth cleansing pill is quite useful to ascended cultivators, it requires rare materials that are found in the wildlands. You will have to purchase the pills for a price. However, this matter is best explained when you are in the city. First, you should follow us. If you refuse, we won't force you, but you should understand what will happen to you." When Han Li heard this, his face slightly changed. He muttered to himself for a moment and looked at the cloudless skies in the distance. He then took another look at the boat and boarded it in a blur. The two gold-armored cultivators smiled at the obvious result. Having witnessed the fearsomeness of the two-colored lightning tribulation, there was only one choice left. Furthermore, he was only an early deity transformation cultivator, so it was quite a miracle for him to last long enough for them to arrive. When Han Li arrived on the board, he looked around and discovered a small-scale spell formation at the center of the boat. Just as he was examining it, the two gold-armored cultivators stepped into it and called out to Han Li. After some brief hesitation, Han Li joined them. The two then struck the formation with a spell seal, and it let out a drone, lighting up in dense light and enveloping the three of them. Afterwards, the older cultivator flipped his palm and produced a golden plate. The plate had many silver rune characters on it. He then slapped the plate on the top of the board, and golden light began to shine from it, along with dazzling silver talisman characters. Meanwhile, the golden boat trembled, suddenly releasing streaks of milky white mist. The mist wrapped around the bottom of the golden board and began to circle around it, eventually forming the light formation Han Li saw from before. The entire spell formation flared blindly, and the boat disappeared with a tremble. The spell formation then scattered without a trace. This was all seen from a distance by Elder Hugh and the core formation cultivators. Ever since the two golden-armored cultivators appeared, they completely kept silent, and even their breaths turned quiet. When the golden boat eventually disappeared, they let out a large sigh, glancing at each other with happiness. The yellow-robed youth hesitated and eventually said, "Elder Huo, it seems the deep heaven guards aren't as fearsome as the legends say. It seems they are exaggerated." Elder Huo hesitated from a moment and said, "What do you know? In the 3 human regions and the 7 demon lands, the sole city free from the jurisdiction of the 3 human sovereigns and the 7 demon kings is Deep Heaven City. Those gold-armored soldiers are among the highest existences in the city. Each of them can freely travel through any region without restriction. Furthermore, they can openly slay any human or demon they deem to be a threat. Their vast authority even inspires some dread in the 3 sovereigns. Furthermore, in their wars against the other tribes, the 3 sovereigns and 7 kings first seek to dispatch the Deep Heaven City's elders." So it was like that. The yellow-robed youth widely opened his eyes in shock. Then after a pause he said, "I've only heard from my master to never offend a Deep Heaven soldier no matter what. I think a while back the Deep Heaven Guard spent an entire month butchering over 100 cultivator clans. However, nobody knew what caused it, and the 3 sovereigns turned a blind eye to it." "That is so, but I don't have much information regarding Deep Heaven City. However, the city's cultivators don't normally appear in the demon and human territories. They are specialized in dealing with great foreign enemies. Furthermore, even if they appear in the territories of the 2 clans, they would only be the gold-armored Deep Heaven Guard." As the two chatted, the other core formation cultivators listened in. They didn't know much about the city and could only look at each other in dismay. At that moment, Han Li was inside a nameless city's secret teleportation formation. The 2 gold-armored cultivators jumped off the golden boat and replaced several of the formation's glittering spirit stones. Then they struck the boat with more spell seals and activated the spell formation once more. When Han Li looked at the crystals, he felt his heart jump. They were extremely valuable high-grade spirit stones. Just as his thoughts churned through his head, the golden boat was engulfed in white light. They teleported to another area. It was clearly an underground cave with a similar teleportation formation underneath the golden boat. The 2 cultivators did the same again, and the boat teleported once more. As Han Li indifferently observed them, the boat continued to teleport another 20 times. In the past, Han Li only used a mid-grade spirit stone to deliver him from the heavenly south to the scattered star seas. By using high-grade spirit stones so many times, they were traveling a distance that Han Li found difficult to imagine. Whoosh! The golden board teleported once more, but this time, Han Li looked around and felt his heart tremble. He immediately realized that they've finally arrived in Deep Heaven City. This time the teleportation formation was set on an altar-like platform that was over 30 meters tall. There were 4 black-armored cultivators surrounding it. The black armor appeared cruder than the armor of the 2 golden-armored cultivators, but silver characters still shined from their surface. The platform was in a huge hall over 300 meters wide and over 50 meters tall. Outside the huge platform, the surrounding space was empty. There were no other objects inside of it. In the instant the golden boat appeared, the 4 black-armored cultivators immediately wore a vigilant expression. But when they saw the golden-armored cultivators, their expression relaxed, but they floated up to the platform. Among them, a large green-eyed man immediately stepped forward and respectfully kneeled. "We pay our respects to the Elder Heaven Guards." When Han Li looked at them, his face stirred. The 4 appeared to be nascent soul cultivators of varying cultivation, 1 at peak stage, 1 mid, and 2 early. "Stand up. This is a newly ascended cultivator. I recall your squad is missing a dark azure guard. Perhaps he will become your squad leader. Bring him to the Spirit Flight Hall to rest for a night. We will report our mission to the elders and see to him later." "Yes." When the large man saw that Han Li was a deity transformation cultivator, he showed no surprise at hearing the Deep Heaven Guard. He simply bowed to Han Li. The pale cultivator then said, "Go ahead, follow them. We'll talk about other matters tomorrow." Han Li nodded. The 3 then descended from the platform and arrived at the hall gates. Han Li took note that the large green-eyed man was the only one following after them. The other 3 were sincerely guarding the platform. It seemed that the spell formation and the golden boat was very important as 4 nascent soul cultivators were guarding it. When they left the hall gate, they appeared in front of a huge road that was 20 meters wide. Gray stone walls were raised to either side, but every interval of the wall had a portion that was engraved with silver talisman characters, giving them an air of mystery. The road was circular and made a shallow incline. Han Li raised his brow, but he didn't have any detailed thoughts. The two gold-armored cultivators then went off to different direction, and the black-armored guard led Han Li away. Every kilometer along the huge road, there would be identical gates that appeared, but some were shut while others were open. For the open gates, Han Li could clearly see within them. They had identical boats, platforms, and teleportation formations, along with several nascent soul cultivators guarding the location. They were also just as empty. As for the halls that were shut, Han Li swept his spiritual sense past them, but he discovered that the silver inscriptions on the wall blocked him. Occasionally, he would see other cultivators on the road. A vast majority of them wore black armor and were at nascent soul stage, but he did come across several cultivators wearing dark azure armor. They possessed deity transformation stage cultivation and were the so-called dark azure guards. When these cultivators saw Han Li, an outsider, they gave him a curious glance but didn't ask him any questions. They simply marched on their way as if out of training. When Han Li saw this, he frowned. After walking for another 3 kilometers, Han Li saw his surroundings suddenly light up, and he arrived in front of a giant hall that was over 3 kilometers wide. Nearly 100 armored cultivators were bustling through the hall in a busy manner. There were dozens similar roads connected to the hall that had people frequently using them. A trace of surprise flashed on Han Li's face, but when he looked up at the ceiling, he felt deeply shocked. The so-called hall didn't have a flat ceiling. Instead, there was a ring-shaped cylindrical opening, like a hollow tower. That meant the opening they arrived from was a gap in the tower wall. This was the first time Han Li had seen such a huge stone tower, but he soon recovered from his shock and his ordinary expression returned. The large green-eyed man leading him didn't mind Han Li's surprise, nor did he make any attempt to rush Han Li. He simply nodded at Han Li when he regained his bearings and led Han Li out the hall once more. When Han Li went outside, he looked to the distance and felt his heart thump. There were towering azure towers in a dense arrangement as far as the eye could see, numbering over 100 at the very least. The base of the towers were surrounded by rows of pagodas attached to smaller buildings. The tallest of the pagodas were 3 kilometers tall, while the shortest were at least 300 meters tall. Each building appeared ordinary apart from its size. Having seen this for the first time, Han Li was left dumbstruck. When the two both left the hall, they took off in streaks of light to a building below a pagoda. The green-eyed man called out to Han Li and brought him to a pavilion that was 300 meters tall. The pavilion was divided into 10 stories, with an opening with each story. There was a 100-meter-tall gate at its very center with the words, Spirit Flight Hall written in silver words. The green-eyed man brought Han Li to the 4th floor of the hall. When they entered the small hall, he saw 7 passages heading off in different directions. The small hall had various dressed cultivators gathered together, speaking to each other with a smile. When Han Li glanced at them, he saw that they were early deity transformation cultivators like himself. When Han Li and the green-eyed man entered, they all turned around and looked at them. Ye, well, if it isn't esteemed nephew Zhuo, have you brought us a newly arrived companion? A white-haired old man with a dark complexion asked with a smile. As the green-eyed man was a late nascent soul cultivator, he didn't dare to be negligent. When the green-eyed man entered the hall, his solemn expression vanished and his bearings appeared entirely changed. He answered with a respectful tone, "So it was Senior Liu. This senior is someone that the Heaven Guards personally brought in from the outside. He isn't someone that entered the city." An odd expression appeared on his face. Could it be that he is a cultivator brought in from the Spirit Flight Tower? Could it be he ascended from another world? Ye, how can he be at early deity transformation stage? Did they say that one can only ascend with their cultivation is at late deity transformation stage? When the early deity transformation cultivators heard this, an uproar was raised in the room, and they all looked at Han Li with an odd expression. Han Li smiled at them and saluted the crowd, but said nothing else, thoughts quickly running through his mind. Could it be that also ascended from a lower realm? But that didn't seem to be the case. If they were natives to the spirit realm, why would they be here? Didn't the Spirit Flight Hall have something to do with ascended cultivators? The green-eyed man quickly greeted the crowd and gave a few vague answers before leading Han Li down one of the passages and taking him to a suite connected to several rooms. The rooms were fashioned after a small-scale cave residence. Not only was there a secluded room for cultivation, but there was also room for pill and weapon refinement. Furthermore, there were a set of restrictions that sealed the rooms, which could only be opened by the person who possessed the restriction medallion. When Han Li saw this, he nodded with satisfaction. The green-eyed man then mentioned a few of the restricted places and immediately handed him a restriction medallion, then uttering a farewell before Han Li could flag him down. Han Li thought to ask him some questions about the circumstances of Deep Heaven City. As of current, he leaned back in a wooden chair in the living room and fiddled with a silver restriction medallion in his hand. He began to think about everything that had happened since his tribulation. According to his original plan, he was going to find a hidden area with abundant spiritual chi and cultivate. He would first enter the spatial tempering stage and then spend the rest of his life pursuing the great Tao. He completely didn't think that ascended cultivators would actually carry the aura of another world and turn minor tribulations into something fearsome. For the first appearance of the two-colored lightning tribulation, he might have truly been able to protect himself, but he definitely wouldn't be able to protect himself the second time. Thus, he immediately followed the two spatial tempering cultivators to Deep Heaven City without much more consideration. Letter 1D6ATF, letter 1D5FF, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D4, 1E, letter 1D6A0, letter 1D556, letter 1D6AC, letter 1D5FC, letter 1D5FA. But when he arrived, he found something that was much different from what he experienced from cultivator cities. It left him completely clueless as he didn't know much about how the city operated. The only thing he knew was that the city had a large relation to cultivators that ascended from lower realms. As these thoughts came to mind, he became restless. Just as he continued to ponder about whether he should inquire about Deep Heaven City circumstances with the cultivators on the outside, as well as what they did with ascended cultivators like himself. As Han Li's heart stirred and had thought to take action, an old man's voice sounded from outside the room. "Fellow Taoist, I am an old man by the name of Liu Hedao. Would you like to chat for a bit?" Han Li paused for a moment and smiled. He wouldn't have to take the initiative to come out. Someone had already come over to befriend him. "So fellow Taoist Liu has come to take a visit. I, Han, am honored to have you." With that said, he waved the medallion in the direction of the door. A wave of silver mist rushed out, and the large door creaked open by itself. A man with a dark complexion and white hair stood outside the door. "So you were surnamed Han. I hope you won't take offense at my sudden visit." The old man smiled and spoke with a polite tone. "Hee, how could I? Even if you didn't come, I planned on heading out anyways." As Han Li was long experienced throughout his journey of cultivation, he didn't believe himself to be superior to this old man Liu, and he replied with a beaming smile. As such, the two began a chat as if they were friends for years. "From that esteemed nephew, I heard that the Heaven Guards personally brought you back to the city. You must be a cultivator that recently ascended from a lower realm. Which mortal realm would that be?" Old man Liu suddenly asked. "Which realm? I'm not too sure about what the spirit realm calls the many lower realms, so I don't know how to answer that. How about this? I'll give you an answer when I come to understand this better. Could you help me with that?" Han Li glanced at him with a smile. He wasn't about to easily give answers about his true origins. After all, during his time in the mortal realm, he was involved with a few superiors in the spirit realm. Regardless of whether it was the soaring sky beast or the wolf king Tian Kui that Silver Moon mentioned, they weren't people that he could currently provoke. Old man Liu laughed. "How foolish of me. You've only entered the spirit realm recently. Of course you wouldn't know. However, the initial generation of ascended cultivators all possess astonishing potential. Their chances of accomplishing spatial tempering is far greater than the descendants of ascended cultivators like me and those native to the spirit realm. They are viewed with importance by the elders. Most of them don't need to undergo examination and are directly appointed as Dark Azure Guards." Initial generation of ascended cultivators. Could Brother Liu explain that to me? An odd expression appeared on Han Li's face and his smile waned. "It isn't a secret. In truth, Brother Han will soon figure this out after only staying in the city for a bit of time." Old man Liu chuckled. Continued, "The initial generation of ascended are those that enter the spirit realm like Brother Han. They are deity transformation cultivators that ascended from their realms. The dense otherworldly aura you carry will take 300 years' worth of earth-cleansing pills to cleanse. The direct descendants of ascended cultivators will carry a portion of this otherworldly aura. So long as they enter nascent soul stage, they will also encounter two-colored tribulations. As for descendants like me, they would have to rush to Deep Heaven City and take an earth-cleansing peel to vanish their otherworldly aura, or else they will perish. Once the otherworldly aura is cleansed, you'll be able to leave the city. About 5 generations after the Ascended arrive, their bloodline will not longer carry the otherworldly aura and be considered the same as a native cultivator. Han Li blinked and asked, "In that case, Brother Liu should have already cleansed himself of the otherworldly aura since you've entered deity transformation stage. Why did you stay?" Brother Han already sees a problem. That's right, even if we've cleansed ourselves of otherworldly aura, there aren't many that are willing to leave Deep Heaven City of their own accord. I don't know more than a few. Not only us, but those native to this land that entered the city also aren't willing to leave. The old man answered with a chuckle. "Oh, how interesting. Could you tell me why?" Han Li's heart stirred, but he still wore a friendly smile. The old man said with a deep tone, "It's quite simple. In Deep Heaven City, the speed of cultivation is doubled compared to other areas. Items found in the 3 regions and 7 lands are certain to be found here. There are even things unique to our city. Brother Han should realize what I am saying." "What, could it be that this place has sacred areas with dense spirit chi?" Han Li asked with roused spirits. There are several of these cultivation sites throughout the city, but we only have one that is equivalent to those found in the 3 sovereigns' main cities. But what is important is that not only do we have a stream of materials from the lands of humans and demons, but the city is also the sole entrance between those lands and the wilderness. As a result, there are countless rare treasures that are brought back from the wilderness. A vast majority of cultivators sell or exchange these materials. Even medicines that allow for advancement over a single night are on the market. However, their price makes them something that could only be looked at. The old man briefly paused before adding, "There is also another reason why the cultivators of this city aren't willing to leave it. Every 10 years, the Deep Heaven City cultivators listen to someone from the Council of Elders explain the worldly Tao. It can answer some doubts about cultivation, and all of the elders are at integration stage cultivation. Nobody else has the same opportunities we do. That is why those that join the city don't often wish to leave." Those benefits, Han Li felt joy at the explanation, but he soon frowned and asked, "But why are there so many high-grade cultivators guarding the city?" In addition to human cultivators, there are also large quantities of demon cultivators that guard the city. They occupy the other half of the city. And apart from that, there are large quantities of demon beasts and body refiners. Half of those low-grade existences originated from the city, while the other half comes from the outside. Our Council of Elders consists of over 10 integration stage cultivators. With such astonishing might, the city has naturally become a target of the wilderness, outer tribes, and true spirit-level existences. The elders have arranged an extremely powerful and profound immortal formation, forcing successive generations of outer invasions to first go through the city. If so much power wasn't garrisoned here, the outer tribes would exterminate us. I heard that if we were to truly fight with the outer tribes, most of the city would be eradicated. Old Man Liu wore a solemn expression. When Han Li heard this, his expression faintly changed, more than half eradicated. "There is no need for Brother Han to be so worried. An outer tribe invades us once anywhere from 60,000 years at the earliest to 100,000 years at the latest. Against such a long period, there is no need for you to be worried. If there is truly an invasion, then you'd be out of luck and could only fight to the death. As for anybody that flees that Deep Heaven City's guard, they will be jointly pursued by both demons and humans. Since there is a smooth life in the city, it is natural to have a bit of danger with it. However, the last invasion of Deep Heaven City took place 30,000 years ago. We will have another 20,000 years before we have to worry about anything." So it was like that. In that case, I was brought here to Deep Heaven City so I could be profited from. Han Li stroked his chin with a pensive expression. Of course, initial generation Ascended have far higher odds of entering spatial tempering than natives and descendants like me. Each Ascended cultivator is viewed with great importance by the elders and aren't easily let go. Furthermore, over the past few years, there have been fewer Ascended cultivators appearing at the Spirit Flight Tower. I heard several of the elders send spiritual sense threads down to the lower realms to investigate the matter, but they hadn't succeeded. Since Brother Han came from a lower realm, did you notice anything strange? When Han Li heard this, he suddenly recalled the matter with the Elder Devil and felt his heart tremble, but he maintained a normal expression and answered, "Nothing. My world was quite normal. Letter 1D557, letter 1D42B, letter 1D6AT, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D604, letter 1D41E, letter 1D41C, letter 1D698, letter 1D696. That is a pity. If Brother Han was able to come up with a reason, he would be heavily rewarded. However, of the cultivators that ascended recently, they also had no clues. I only heard in recent years that the demon clans discovered something. As a result, the Elder Council shouldn't interrogate you much over the matter. Han Li smiled and then asked, "Ah yes, Brother Liu mentioned something about the Dark Azure Guards. Could you tell me something about them? Are they the ones I saw wearing azure armor?" "That's right. Dark Azure Guards are a mid-grade existence in our city, and I am one of them. They command 10 black-armored guards. Dark Azure Guards require deity transformation stage cultivation, but not all deity transformation stage cultivators are Dark Azure Guards. Brother Han should realize the difference." "I have an idea. They either lack leadership or aren't skilled in battle, I think." "That is correct. Now that we're on the topic, there are two types of Deep Heaven City Guards. There are those that appointed missions on a fixed schedule and may make arrangements for themselves during other times. But these guards aren't given many spirit stones during their 10-year tenure and are often found wanting more, but there is very little danger. The other kind undergo missions that are assigned by the Council of Elders. Each finished mission will give good benefits. Not only spirit stones, but treasures, medicine, and other treasures are rewarded. Of course, these missions are far more dangerous, and most often relate to outer tribes in the wilderness. One must make careful consideration before agreeing. However, after each completed mission, you don't need to take another assignment anywhere from decades to a century. You'll be able to peacefully cultivate for longer periods of time. Of course, the two posts aren't rigid and you can change your posts as you wish. "Many thanks for Brother Liu's pointers," Han Li said with a calm expression. The old man chuckled and waved his hand. Then they chatted for a while more before the old man stood up and departed. After the old man left, Han Li's smile faded and he walked into the secluded room and meditated in silence. As for the dark-skinned old man, he returned to where the other deity transformation cultivators were chatting. When they saw the old man, they all walked over to him. Did Brother Liu acquire any information from him? Information? That man is tight-lipped. Apart from acknowledging he is someone who ascended from a lower realm, he said nothing else. I only answered a few of his questions. The old man shook his head with a helpless expression. It is only natural for him to be cautious when Brother Liu came knocking on his door. He only just arrived in the spirit realm. However, we don't have any intentions other than befriend him. After all, the ascended have high potential. The deity transformation stage cultivators continued to chat pleasantly as if they had no evil intentions towards Han Li. As for old man Liu, he simply smiled in silence. On the morning of the next day, Han Li sat motionlessly in the secluded room before suddenly opening his eyes. He then walked out into the living room and used his command medallion to open the main door. There was a white-clothed cultivator standing there with a blank expression. "Greetings, Senior." Han Li didn't dare to neglect him and saluted him with both hands. This was the pale-faced man in golden armor from before, but now he exchanged the armor for Confucian robes. The harsh aura from his body had eased, and he gave a more humble impression. "Fellow Taoist Han, there is no need to be so polite. I've only just arrived. Since Brother Li is busy with other matters, I will be the only one to see you today. My name is Zhao Wugui." The spatial tempering cultivator appeared to be far friendlier than the day before. Surprised, Han Li hastily addressed him as Senior Zhao. He then invited him into the room and gave him the main seat in the living room. As soon as Zhao Wugui took a seat, he offered Han Li an azure jade pendant. "Since you've been here for half a day, you must have questions. I'll keep the long story short. As an ascended cultivator and someone who was able to persist against two-colored tribulation for so long, you must possess powerful abilities. As such, I've already had you apply for the position of a Dark Azure Guard. This is your identity token. Keep it well. When the time comes, you'll take over 3rd Squad 56. They are the small group of 4 you saw at the teleportation hall the day before." Han Li didn't immediately reach out for it and hesitantly said, "As someone who's just arrived, there is much I don't understand. Isn't it a bit rash for me to suddenly be appointed to that position?" Zhao Wugui chuckled. "Fellow Taoist Han doesn't need to be so modest. Every ascended cultivator is appointed a Deep Azure Guard when they come to the city. They are mostly all extremely competent. As for your understanding of the city, you will know everything about it after living here for a year." Han Li's eyes stirred and he eventually took the jade pendant. "In that case, I won't decline it." Under close examination, he noticed silver rune patterns inscribed on it. It also had the golden characters, 3rd Squad 56. When Han Li took the jade pendant, Zhao Wugui nodded with satisfaction. Afterwards, he began to explain some of the general knowledge regarding the city. Some of it had been mentioned by old man Liu the day before, and some of it was new. It was very useful, of course. Zhao Wugui took out a white jade slip from his storage pouch and handed it over to Han Li. All right, I've said enough. This is only a place where ascended cultivators are kept temporarily. It isn't appropriate for long-term use. All cultivators at nascent soul stage and above are given their own residence in Deep Heaven City. However, you'll have to strive for the better ones. You know more when you make arrangements at the Jade Fault Pavilion. This is a map of the city. Take a good look at it. For the first month you come to the city, there is no need for you to immediately take an assignment, but in a month you will be assigned a set of deep azure armor. Then he bid farewell. Han Li respectfully thanked him and walked him out. When Han Li went back inside, he took the jade slip into his hand and pressed it against his forehead, sinking his spiritual sense into it instantly. A moment later, his expression changed. Han Li swept his spiritual sense through it with a changing face. Deep Heaven City is actually this large. It appears even larger than the capital cities in the 3 human regions. He then stroked the jade slip in his hand for a moment more and casually left the room. Regardless, he first headed to the Jade Fault Pavilion and make arrangements for his cave residence. From what Zhao Wugui said, there should be something strange about it. A bit of his interest was piqued. Just as he committed the location of the Jade Fault Pavilion to memory, he left the pavilion in an azure streak. As he swept past a dozen giant nearby pagodas, Han Li took a hidden glance at the various cultivators he spotted on the way. He saw cultivators wearing various sets of armor, but they most commonly appeared near the huge buildings. Those farther away were wearing common cultivator attire from the spirit realm. It was unknown if they had taken off their armor or if they were cultivators not part of the city. However, there was something he was certain of. You are normally required to wear armor when you enter the huge pagoda. Furthermore, Han Li discovered that yellow and white armored body refiners used the first few floors of the huge pagodas. The yellow armored body refiners only possessed mid-grade cultivation, while white armored body refiners had high-grade cultivation. The number of them entering the huge pagodas was far beyond the cultivators wearing black and azure armor. When Han Li saw this, he came to understand a bit. It appeared that Deep Heaven City's military force was due to the countless soldiers stationed at the huge pagodas. The yellow, white, black, azure, and golden armor were all clear classifications of their fighting power. After Han Li took a few glances at the huge pagoda and the soldiers, he turned his attention over to his objective. After about an hour of flight, Han Li eventually caught sight of an extremely tall city wall in the distance. Then, the light around his body darkened and he dropped down to an unremarkable 3-story building below him. Although the building was small and plain, many cultivators were bustling in and out of it. Han Li simply stopped and examined the building and the streaking lights of flying cultivators for a moment more before he approached the gate. The pagoda gate's signboard, the Jade Fault Pavilion, was written in bold artistic lettering. Han Li glanced at the sign with narrowed eyes for a long while before he slowly stepped inside. The first floor had a large hall that was over 100 meters wide. There were several dozens of cultivators standing in the hall, looking at a huge screen shining an azure light at the very end of the room. The screen was a map that was 6 meters tall and over 30 meters wide. Silver specks of light lit up on it, along with a few numbers on occasion. There was also an azure-robed middle-aged man that was standing in front of it with a smile. Han Li swept his spiritual sense past it and discovered that the cultivators standing in the hall were all at nascent soul stage. As for the azure-robed man, he was a deity transformation stage cultivator. Suddenly, a skinny old man walked up to the azure-robed man and bowed before handing over an iron plate shining in black light and a storage bracelet. The middle-aged man took a glance at the iron plate and the storage pouch and flipped his hand with a nod. The storage pouch disappeared, and he handed the iron plate back to the old man. The old man's spirits immediately trembled. He grabbed the plate and approached the huge math and lightly waved it. Suddenly, a black line shined from its surface and it wrote 2 on one of the silver specks. The speck of light blurred and the number suddenly changed to 3. Afterwards, the old man immediately withdrew. After the time it took to finish a cup of tea, over a dozen people approached the azure-robed man and gave him either an item or some spirit stones. Most of the time, the middle-aged man nodded and gave them a sign on the mark, but there were a few times where he would shake his head and the rejected person would only withdraw dejectedly. Han Li soon discovered that the huge map displayed the various spirit veins in Deep Heaven City. The deeper the azure light in an area and the greater the number that appeared, more contested the claim of the land. There was even an azure light near some green parts of the map that had an astonishing number of 12. When Han Li saw this, he stroked his chin and he remembered what Zhao Wugui said. It appeared he would have to vie with others for a suitable cave residence. Suddenly, a clear voice spoke from behind Han Li. "Senior, are you looking for a suitable spirit land to establish your cave residence?" Han Li slowly turned around with a calm expression. He saw a slender, beautiful woman that was politely standing to the side. Her cultivation was only at foundation establishment stage, but it was to be expected given her maid attire. "That's right, but I'm still looking for a good place. I'm not very satisfied with the spirit mountains here," Han Li calmly replied. "Senior must be a deity transformation stage cultivator. The first floor is only for black armored guards. Senior should head to the second floor," the girl said with a smile. "How did you know I was a deity transformation stage cultivator? You shouldn't be able to tell with your cultivation." Han Li's heart trembled and a cold glint lit up from his eye. "There is no need for Senior to be surprised." The girl immediately lifted her hand and revealed a palm-sized plate with silver rune characters flashing from it. "Although this junior's cultivation is low, I possess a spirit pressure plate. Unless there is a senior hiding their aura, I can see their cultivation." Han Li looked at the plate and felt a bit of a headache. It was unknown if those human elders have acquired imperial records relating to tool refinement, or if their comprehension in this field had reached a stage where they can utilize these understandings in the city. Either way, this seemed to smash his initial understanding of common conventions. He would have to pay more attention. If he was caught unaware during a crucial time, some problems would occur. Of course, none of these thoughts were betrayed by his face. He simply nodded at the girl and had her lead the way upstairs. There were far fewer people on the second floor, but it appeared far more decorated. Although many areas were set up on the screen, there were simply 5 people calmly having a seat as they closely examined the map on the screen. The side of the screen, there was a large purple-robed man lazily sitting there. Han Li swept his spiritual sense past the large man and his expression changed. He was an early spatial tempering cultivator. As for the people that were studying the map, there were deity transformation stage cultivators like himself. Each of them had a fair maid dressed in similar robes. All of them were exceptionally beautiful and at foundation establishment stage. Han Li took a deep breath and saluted the large purple-robed man in the distance. Then he followed one of the maids to one of the chairs. Like the others, the girl stood behind Han Li in a deferential manner. Han Li glanced at the others and saw they were looking at the green areas on the map. It appeared they were the mountain ranges in Deep Heaven City, but there were far fewer silver characters on the map than downstairs. Most of them only said 1 or 2. At most, there were several that said 4, but that was only for one location. Han Li muttered to himself for a moment and he waved to the maid behind him. He said, "I'm not too familiar with the spirit lands near here. Can you give me an introduction?" "Yes, senior. This map contains the 3 mountain ranges in the city. The central mountain range, the Jade Rapid Mountains, have the most abundant spiritual qi. This is where most deity transformation stage seniors live. Furthermore, they also have many particular spirit medicines that grow there. This time, there are 2 deity transformation stage seniors that hadn't survived their tribulation, and there is one that also reached the end of this lifespan. According to the rules, their residences have been made available. Many fight for them. The other area is the Heavenly Sound Mountains. Many deity transformation stage cultivators live there as well, but the spiritual qi isn't as abundant as in Jade Rapid Mountain. As for the Jade Sound Mountain, it is a place that was originally meant for nascent soul cultivators. It has recently been opened for use to deity transformation stage seniors, but I fear it may not be very suitable for you. However, there are very few cave residences placed on the mountain. If senior wishes to have a large stretch of land exclusive to himself, that may be the better choice." So it was like that. Han Li slowly nodded and he took another look at the screen. The maid tactfully stood back behind Han Li and couldn't help but take another glance at Han Li. Han Li only appeared to be in his 20s, but he was already a deity transformation stage cultivator. Although she had seen many deity transformation cultivators during her time in the Jade Fault Pavilion, seeing one so young had piqued her curiosity. Suddenly, a wealthily dressed fat man boldly stood a few steps forward and raised an embroidered box and an azure jade pendant. He respectfully brought it up to the large azure-robed man and said, "This junior recently acquired a talk of silver immortal grass at 4,000 years of maturity. Can senior decide if I have the qualifications to choose a spirit land? Even with one of 4,000 years, it will be difficult. Let me take a look." The large purple-robed man spoke casually and raised his hand to take the pendant and the box. When he opened the box, he found a sparkling silver light that released a refreshing medicinal scent. Even as someone well-versed in medicinal plants, when Han Li smelled it, he couldn't help but concede its quality. The large purple-robed man narrowed his eyes and examined the medicinal plant for a long while before reluctantly saying, 4,000 years. It seems to be lacking a few hundred, but I'll let it go. It'll qualify." The fat man let out an inward sigh of relief and thanked the purple-robed man with a smile. He used the jade pendant on a speck of light that said 4. The number that said 4 was touched by the pendant's azure light and it blurred to a 5. This was a location in the Jade Rapid Mountains, the place with the densest spiritual qi. When the other sitting cultivators saw this, their expressions vastly changed. A few of the others had a similar idea to him and now had no choice but to take a change of plans. Because the fat man was a late deity transformation stage cultivator, his cultivation and words seemed to weigh down on the other cultivators. Now that the fat man had chosen, he returned to his own seat and wanted to see what the others would pick. Because of his choice, the remaining cultivators eventually stood up to make their choice, both taking an area at Heavenly Sound Mountain, one without any people and one with. Once those two made their selection, they immediately headed down. The remaining cultivators each frowned, as if unable to come to a decision. At that moment, Han Li suddenly stood up and walked to the purple-robed man. The other cultivators were faintly startled. After all, Han Li had only recently arrived, so it was unexpected for him to quickly come to a decision. Han Li stroked his storage bracelet and took out a white jade box into his hand. Then, with a smile, he handed them to the large purple-robed man with his own jade pendant. The purple-robed man didn't immediately take the jade box. Instead, he glanced at Han Li and said, "I heard there was a newly ascended cultivator that arrived in the city. Are you that fellow surnamed Han?" "Senior is well informed. That is me." Han Li's heart trembled, but he showed none of his shock on his face. "In that case, this should be the first time you've picked a cave residence. You won't need to pay a price and can choose a spirit land." "Many thanks, Senior." Han Li's face blanked and he quickly withdrew the jade box with a smile. When the cultivators heard that Han Li was a newly ascended, they glanced at him with an odd expression. It seemed newly ascended cultivators were a special existence in the city. The large man quickly examined Han Li's pendant and gave it back to him with a nod. Han Li didn't hesitate and waved his pendant over an uninhabited area. The azure light passed through it and marked the area with 1. An uproar was raised when they saw the area Han Li chose. The area Han Li picked was an area on Jade Rapid Mountain with the most inferior spiritual qi. It wasn't strange for a deity transformation stage cultivator to choose that mountain range, but there were other areas on the mountain range with no one as well. Han Li instead chose the most unremarkable area with the least spiritual qi. This left them bewildered. The spirit land's sole benefit was that to make up for the land's deficient spiritual qi, they gave a larger plot of land to make up for it. The land spanned thousands of kilometers, several times in size compared to the other spirit lands on the mountain range. Letter 1D5F3, letter 1D69B, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D556, letter 1D568, letter 1D556, letter 1D5F0, letter 1D5FC, letter 1D55E. But everyone knew that the quality of the land was directly related to the amount of spiritual qi on the land. No matter how wide the land may be, the medicine and ores would certainly be lacking. It is even worse for the cultivator in question. In the purple-robed man's surprise, he glanced at the man for a long while and frowned. "You truly chose that as your cave residence. You should know this selection can't be changed for 100 years. Han Li calmly answered, "I've only arrived in the spirit realm. I want a place to stay for the time being. I don't wish to fight over space with other fellow Taoists. Although the area is lacking, there is no one else there." The purple-robed man then glanced at Han Li with an odd expression and waved his hand. With his originally lazy voice, he said, "If those are your thoughts, then so be it. In any case, after you mark it, no one else will be able to change it." Han Li saluted him without further concern and returned to his seat, planning on staying a while longer. Then another cultivator stood up and selected the same area as the large purple-robed man. But then footsteps clapped, and someone entered the second floor unattended by a maid. When the cultivators on the second floor saw this person, their expressions all changed. The fat man with the largest cultivation, on the other hand, looked at him with bright eyes and he called out, "So it was fellow Taoist Wang. I didn't know you were interested in contesting spirit lands." The person who entered was a blue-robed man with a headband. He had sharp slanted eyebrows, giving him a menacing impression. He glanced at the fat man and smiled. He, if Brother Jin has come to change his cave residence, then so can I." This person was a mid-deity transformation stage cultivator, but he spoke to the late-stage fat man with a friendly tone. This caused Han Li's heart to stir and take another look at the blue-robed man. After all, at this stage of cultivation, every difference in grade signified a vast disparity in power. Of course, those like him that possessed spirit treasures, created heavenly flames from devouring spirits, and practiced heaven-defying abilities like divine essence-effused light were the exception. Since the blue-robed man acted so familiarly with the late-stage cultivator, he should belong in this category. "Little brother Wang must be joking. You hold a top-grade spirit land. What would you exchange it for?" The fat man stroked his chin and wore a trace of confusion. I've been recently cultivating a secret technique that doesn't need too much spiritual chi. I require a larger area, or it will be difficult to cultivate. I'm going to change it for the time being." The blue-robed man replied with a shock. So it was like that, the fat man said with understanding, but it was unknown if he truly believed him. When Han Li heard the two talk, he frowned for a brief moment. The blue-robed man took several steps to the purple-robed man and saluted him. "I pay my respects to Marshal Uncle Jiao. My master sends his regards." From that old eccentric's rotten character, why would he say that? Nevertheless, you master hide from 6 greater tribulations already. I fear he won't be able to hide from the 7th, the large man said with a cold laugh. When the blue-robed man heard the purple-robed man's reply, he wore an embarrassed expression, but he soon answered, "My master has been secluded for 200 years. He's preparing to forge a spirit treasure that can withstand the next calamity." "A spirit treasure? It seems your master's luck is quite good. Last time he had his spirit treasures destroyed to withstand the tribulation, and he managed to gather enough materials for another. In that case, your master does have a chance at surviving the next one. All right, enough of that. I am on duty. Quickly make your choice." The purple-robed man's expression sank and he said no further. "As you wish." The blue-robed man quickly swept his gaze past the man and looked at several areas with a number, and his expression sank. Someone actually chose such a remote area on Jade Rapid Mountains. Not daring to ask the purple-robed man any questions, he turned to the fat man and pointed at an area on the map. "Brother Jin, you've been here a while. Do you know who chose that place?" When the fat man saw where he pointed, an odd expression appeared on his face, and he unconsciously glanced in Han Li's direction. The blue-robed man quickly understood what the fat man's face meant. He promptly turned around and closely examined Han Li. When he saw Han Li's cultivation was only at early stage, he wore an arrogant expression and he coldly said, "So you're the one who chose the spirit land?" After a moment of silence, Han Li replied, "And you also want it?" The blue-robed man snorted and eerily said, "My secret technique can only be cultivated in a suitable place. If you're smart, you'll renounce your claim. Otherwise, don't blame me for being ruthless in our fight." His threat was clear to see. Han Li remained silent. In order to avoid a fight, he intentionally picked an area with sparse spiritual chi. He wanted to avoid provoking any problems as he only had interests in cultivating. He didn't want to make any enemies that would disturb him. He completely didn't expect this plan to backfire and have someone come knocking on his door. Han Li found this matter to be truly laughable. With blue light shining from his eyes, he took a quick glance at the others. The large purple-robed man still lazily sat in his seat and had yet to raise his eyes. It appeared he didn't really care. As for the other cultivators, they looked at him with schadenfreude. "Senior, if I renounce my choice, will I be able to pick another area?" Han Li calmly asked the purple-robed man. "You cannot. There are only so many spirit lands. Everyone will only have one opportunity to fight for it. If you lose, you'll have to contest an empty land in another 100 years," he replied expressionlessly. When Han Li heard this, he sighed. To delay the maturation of his spirit medicines and creation of spirit pills for 100 years was something he found intolerable. To the side, the blue-robed man sneered and said, Even if you have to wait 100 years, you'll be able to pick another area. But if you don't listen to me, he. When Han Li heard him, he raised his brow and smiled. I will not agree to your request. From the way I see it, it'd be best for you to look for a different area to cultivate. I don't wish to injure you, if I were to make a mistake. Han Li spoke casually, and although he only finished half his sentence, his blunt words were extremely obvious. The spectators were stunned.